If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that humans will believe almost anything. On Blasphemy with Chris and Marnie, we take a look at some of these beliefs, uncover their very human origins, how they've developed and changed over time, and the very real consequences they had in society and culture. Impacts that continue even today in our lives. Okay, do a quick thing. Just talk a little bit.
Talk a little bit, because
Okay,
I
perfect.
gotta talk a little
Now you're
bit.
showing up. Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
Welcome back to Blasphemy. I'm Chris Setti, and with me, as always, my favorite person, everything in the world is Marnie. How you doing?
I'm good.
It's been a while.
Yes.
I was just looking. So today, just to let everyone know, we're going to do Christmas Part 4. And it's been a while because I went and looked, and our last episode on the Christmas kind of stuff was Christmas 2020.
Was that wasn't the last week?
That wasn't the last podcast
okay,
episode we recorded,
okay.
but when we're talking Christmas,
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
decided I'm just going to call this Christmas Part 4 because we did 1, 2, and 3. But that was in 2020. Man, a lot's happened since then.
Yeah.
We were so innocent and
Oh.
no, but yeah, so we're back. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to do this for a very, very long time as well. It's something that is good for my mental health. However, we undertook a lot. Actually, a lot's happened in the intervening time since we last saw you. It was back in
We don't see them.
True. Spoke to you one way. And
Talked at you.
yeah, I think it was like sometime in like maybe May of 2021 was our last episode. And then,
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so
Because
then
in June.
the next month, Marnie and I decided to buy a hair salon. Sounds like such a quaint little fun, but it's huge, and we knew nothing about running a business. And I mean, Marnie's a hairstylist; she knew all about that. But when it came down to actually other stuff, so it's been an interesting ride.
Yes.
We bought it, had an employee die in the first few weeks, just
No,
suddenly.
week.
First
the
week,
we took over.
just she was fine when we bought it.
Yeah.
And, R.I.P. Christina, think about you all
Yeah,
the
yeah.
time. I wish I could have got to know you better.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, we've just had a lot go down. My dad died in August of 2021,
2 months later, yeah.
which was rough. Shout out, Dad. You're amazing.
Yeah.
And, we've just had a whole bunch of stuff going on,
Mm-hmm.
mostly running this giant business and trying to figure all that out. But I'm so glad to be doing this again, actually. I've been wanting to do for so long.
Yeah.
I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I'm always just like, oh, I want to do this again. I had such a good time doing this.
I don't listen to podcasts at all.
Marnie doesn't. That's all I do. I don't listen to music. I don't give a shit about
I
music,
listen
to be
music.
honest. I know people are like, what? You have no soul. Probably not. Okay? And neither do you. But but yeah, I'm not a huge it's not that I dislike music. I love music. I have lots and lots and lots of music I
That's
like.
what's so wild is that's the thing. You not like a music fan, right? But
Not really.
you can remember the words, you can remember the tune, you can find the note and sing it. You can play it on guitar. You don't even like to dance, and you can fucking catch the rhythm and be taught a move. Pisses me the fuck off because I love music, and it takes I love to dance. I would love to sing, and it takes me more effort to find the note, to project my voice, and all of the things that you just like easily do that you don't give a shit about.
I know I can play the guitar. I can
I know.
sing-ish, like enough that it doesn't sound terrible. No, and it's not like I don't like music or first of all, my mind just works that way. Like it just traps information that's floating
I
by.
know.
And so I have this weird thing where I can hear like the first of a song on, on wherever you're at in the grocery store or whatever. And I know what it
I
is for some
know.
reason. And like,
you'd think that that's a music lover, and he's not.
no, but I do listen to constant information just because that's more
He is a
interesting to me.
knowledge lover.
Yeah. So I listened to a lot of stuff out there, and I've just been like, oh, I want to do this again. That was super fun. And so I thought, yeah, let's pick it up. It's Christmas 2023. Holy shit. And I thought, let's delve into another Christmas episode and just kind of give a gift for the season. Now, as far as future episodes go, I'm working on some. I don't know what the cadence will be as far as like how often we'll put them out. Like I said, we got a lot going on. I actually have another business that's a Venetian plaster business, which is like, I like. I tell people my day job is serving witches because it's just witchcraft happening in the salon, and we have a bunch of amazing people. I love it. And then I go and I work with a bunch of construction guys and like get to,
And one's like you're at the desk all day, and then the other you're like
moving.
physical labor.
Oh, it's physical
all day.
Yeah.
And they're kind of a good trade-off because I think you're glad to get to either one of them, like to switch off once you get to the other.
Yeah, I did things the right way. I started a manual labor job at 50. That's how you do it. Oh, man. But I'm actually lucky because I didn't ever get hurt. I was too small to play football. So, like, I didn't get that. I wasn't going to wear the wrestling outfit, so I didn't do that. So, like, a lot of these things that end up, making you a little bit slow and I don't really have. And so I'm 53 and I feel fine and I can do this. I mean, believe me, if I was 30, I would be able to do it so much longer and without as much after pain. But so we have a lot going on, just doing our thing. So, but we will put out more episodes. I have a bunch of ideas and it's it'll be fun.
Yeah.
But I'm just not sure how often they'll come out. But just look ahead and I'll keep you guys in the loop. So tonight, since we're talking Christmas, I thought let's pick a topic that is associated with Christmas, but also has, it's interesting. And there's also a lot of it in all kinds of belief, even apart from Christmas, but they do play a major role in Christmas. So let's talk about them. And that's angels, right? Angels is big. You see angels everywhere. We have sports teams named after them, movies about them, millions of statues and greeting cards and all kinds of stuff. And maybe you have a Christmas tree in your house right now, and on top of it is probably maybe an angel. And we'll talk about how that happened. And I wanted to dive into this topic and see like where'd this come from, because we tend to associate angels. Well, we'll get into it, but we'll see that it's way different. Like it's evolved into something that isn't in line with the supposed religions that we're like supposedly like believing them over, but it's still fun and everything. We can get into it. So when we think of an angel, typically what comes to mind is a picture, right? When I say angel, most people in the Western world, especially, and especially the world, influenced by Christendom, the Western world, immediately we have an image in our mind. And while they may differ a little bit, they're probably pretty dead on similar, right? Some like pretty man with wings, or you know what I mean? Like we have this image of like, or a woman or whatever, but this human figure with wings and flowing robes and all that kind of stuff like that. And we'll talk later about how that came about, because spoiler alert, that's not in the Bible whatsoever.
No.
And it's not in anything.
Having the religious past that I have, what I know, they're described that is totally different.
Oh, totally different. And even that is, we'll get into. But yeah, we have this image, and really, so an angel really now more than anything is a picture. It's an image to us. It's an idea. And like I said, I don't even have to describe it to you because we likely all have a similar picture in our mind's eye right now. We'll talk about how we got there, but first, it's important to understand the legacy of this mythological character. And so while we associate angels with like Judeo-Christian beliefs or maybe Abrahamic religions, because Islam has angels in the mix, and Judaism and Christianity, really they predate all of that by thousands of years.
Mm.
Okay, angels are not a novel concept. They're not something that Christianity made up or anything like that. They were made up much, much, much earlier, right? And so first, let's talk about the word angel to begin with. We get the word angel from a Latin root called, that's, I believe I'm pronouncing this right, it's angelus. And then also we kind of English came primarily influenced by Greek and Latin. And so the Greek version is angelos. That's why we say angel. That's the only reason we say angel, because that word doesn't mean angel, right? Angel is our version of the Latin and Greek words that mean messenger.
Right.
The
Okay.
word angel means messenger, and it was used to talk about human messengers.
I understood that, and that's what they called them in Christianity.
Yeah, if you're in a certain church, you'll hear that, right? One that's kind of study heavy or something like that.
Is what we were.
Exactly, and so that's where the word angel comes from. It doesn't mean a winged creature serving God or anything like that. It means messenger,
Right.
and like I said, it was used in all kinds of ways. Depicting both human and supernatural creatures, kind of stuff. As our ancient human ancestors began to create and form pantheons of gods and define their characters and workings, they borrowed from their human experience. It's the only thing we have to borrow from,
duh.
and that's what we did, which included the use of messengers, angels, right, in order for rulers and leaders to carry out their plans, campaigns, and desires, right? Thus, the gods needed such important operatives when carrying out their divine purposes as well, right? It makes sense. We're like, well, I mean, we got a king, and the only way that we command any of this shit or run this empire is people are running messages, and stuff like that. And information has to get from here to there. They got to direct this. They didn't have the concept of fucking iPhone and internet to where, like, just send a text, right? They lived in a world where to get a message from here to there, someone had to fucking go there, right? And so this was an important part of their experience. And thus, as they began creating all these gods, they go, well, it must be important for them to have this going on too, right? They need messengers. How are they going to fucking get shit done, right? I know the common esoteric idea of as above, so below is intriguing, but when it comes to our religions and mythological constructions, the situation is really as below, so above, right? So as we're creating these ideas around gods and giving them qualities, they're all very human qualities. They might be super powered and amped up and beyond what we thought our capabilities ever would be, but they're very human in their thing. And so they obviously had to take from their human kind of doings and the way that things were happening and the pressures they were experiencing and go, well, they must be experiencing the same thing. And so, if you're not familiar with that, as above, so below, people will be like, it's this ancient saying. No, it's not. It came about in like the fucking, I don't know, late 1800s, 1900s, something like that. It's fucking not that old, right? But the idea is like, oh, just like, the cosmos is swirling and inside our body, the atoms are swirling as above, so below, this connection of like, we come from cosmic whatever. And while I understand all these correlations and stuff, when it comes to these religions, we invented them, which means we had to take
Don't
the
you
raw.
have a pair of Vans that say as above? So
I
below?
do.
Just wanna. You sound like you're all that's stupid.
I'm not saying it's stupid because I'm saying that
you have that saying on your shoes.
But yes, but I'm not saying it's stupid.
I know your tone sounds like you are.
What my point, I know, but what I'm saying is that works great when you're considering these abstract concepts and kind of models.
Yeah.
And correlating those things.
Yeah.
But we then apply that to these other things that lend some credence or some universal truth to them when really they came out of particular people in a particular culture with particular ideas and lifestyles that they imparted onto these constructions.
So you use it. You use a lot of terms differently than people know them to be, and then when you expand on like what they really mean, it always sounds like you wouldn't use any of this stuff and that you think it's dumb. But but you so I'm just pointing out that so you put that on your shoes because it meant to you what?
I put it on my shoes because they were astrology shoes.
Yeah.
And it just traps people into asking me about it, and so I can talk to them about it. I mean, I don't even believe that astrology reflects as above, so
That's what
below.
I
believe
know.
it still reflects as below, so above.
I know.
But
I know that's what you believe, so I'm asking you why you put it on there.
I don't know, just to fucking put it on there. It fit. I don't know. I just thought it went along with the shoes I was making. It was a design choice.
It's a design choice.
Anyway, my point is, angels were what we call angels, messengers. Let me just say that.
Uh-huh.
Divine messengers were necessary because it was necessary for them, right? Because the people had this necessary role.
Right, yeah.
The gods needed
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
right? And that's really where this all idea of an angel came from. And so, as you can imagine, when formulating deities and characters like angels, ideas of swiftness, traveling long distances, and devotion to the message sender significantly influenced how such messengers would be depicted, right? If you need a messenger that's fast and it can like go from this part of the world to the other part of the world or to another world, right? These are gods. So ideas of, wings
Right.
and these
They had
things
the wings
obviously
on the feet thing.
made perfect. So that's Mercury. He's later. He kind of
Yeah.
takes the place of someone that we'll talk about that is
Okay.
absolutely an angel from a picture standpoint, and we'll talk about her later. So get there. We'll get there, and Mercury plays into that. But yes, he had wings, and he was the messenger of the gods, was he not?
Yeah.
He
So
didn't have him on his back.
it's the
That doesn't
image-
make him
so
not
I
an
guess-
angel. He was an angel. Yes.
So the wings came from like the idea of wanting to express speed.
Travel, speed.
Yeah.
The gods need messengers. What do the messengers need to be? Quick.
Mm-hmm.
You're dealing with gods, right? Who are fighting other
I
gods.
don't perceive them now to be except the ones on the heels, but the ones on the back, like I don't think of like those being representative of speed.
Yeah, because we live in a world where there's
Right.
airplanes and stuff.
Right.
These people, a bird was way faster than anything
Yeah,
they were ever
yeah.
going. You know what I'm saying?
And as a bird flies, it's like can go straight to the thing.
Exactly. It like able to go over all the obstacles that they're
Yeah.
dealing with.
Yeah,
I got to
yeah,
go
yeah.
fucking over this mountain and they just go to zip,
Yeah.
And even more importantly, these angels not only serve to deliver messages between other supernatural entities and gods and all this stuff, but maybe more importantly, how do these gods get fucking shit to us? How do they teach us stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Well, messengers
Yeah.
that bring from the gods to man, right?
Yeah.
And so this is kind of the formulation that creates the role of a messenger, which through Latin and Greek and English ends up being the word angel that we use
Right.
today. Okay. So even though it's a picture to us and it's more of an image and kind of an archetype, it's actually a role. It's
Yeah.
a function
Yeah.
that needs to happen in order for mankind to interact with the gods and for the gods to be able to interact with each other and, coordinate and do battle and whatever they're doing. So probably the oldest known example of a divine character who would be considered an angel in English, going back to the Sumerian civilization goes back to the Sumerian civilization in ancient Mesopotamia. Their chief god was named Enki, and he interacted with humanity through intermediaries who delivered messages, bringing them human culture, learning, and agriculture according to Enki's will, right? And they were known as the Anunnaki, and they were actually portrayed as like the sons and daughters of Enki, right? They were like the offspring of Enki. This is not a monotheistic religion, right? So plenty of gods, and gods had sons and daughters, and so the Anunnaki were these kind of emissaries. They were messengers, they were teachers, they were guides that brought these Enki's will and his plans and his knowledge and stuff. And so the Sumerians believe that that's how they got civilization and culture, all the things that they're like, how did we get here?
Remind me where the Sumerians were geographically.
In Mesopotamia. So that's like up, the Tigris River, like in that Egypt kind of like
okay.
that plain, the Euphrates and Tigris and Iraq, all up in that area.
Okay.
So let's see. They were known as the Anunnaki, like I said, and were portrayed as the sons and daughters of Enki. This is also, by the way, something that the Old Testament uses. So there's some debate whether they're talking about angels, but a predominant theory in Christian scholarship, or what do you want to call it, there's this term that's used. I believe it's in the book of Numbers when they're talking about The Nephilim,
Yeah,
another
yeah,
great topic
Yeah,
that people
yeah.
love to go nuts over. And the Nephilim, by the way, are these, ancient aliens will tell you all about it. Go listen. There's so many books about this shit. Same thing with the Anunnaki, by the way. Big ancient alien people, because they obviously weren't mythological creatures that they just imagined and created. They were space aliens who literally taught man how to do all this, kind of shit. And so, anyway, they're referred to. The translation in our English says the sons of God. And in the Hebrew, it's the Benai Elohim, the sons of the gods, actually. Okay. But so you can see these things that are very similar, right? So these are the sons of God. And then, in the Old Testament, there's the sons of God. And in the Old Testament, the sons of gods go, ooh, human women are hot. Let's go fuck them. And they go and have sex with them. And then they end up creating supposedly a race of giants called, the Nephilim. And then those become fallen angels, all this kind of stuff that just they go wild with. But anyway, my point is, they believe that those are depicting angels. And just like the Sumerians, they were seen as the sons of God, right? Who were there to interact with humans and kind of be that connection point, that intermediary between God or the gods.
Interesting.
Yeah.
An intermediary between God and man, the Son of God.
I thought Jesus made that happen. I thought that was new. Anyway, in Greece, they would have called them angelos, right? But they weren't. They were in Samaria a long time before Greece, and they called them their word for it, Anunnaki. They were messengers or what have you. But the point is, an angel is not a figure from a particular religion. It's a divine role that we assign to gods and other figures throughout our mythologies, going all the way back to the earliest ones that we know. Something isn't an angel because they look a certain way or because they adhere to some Christian idea. They're an angel because they serve as a messenger and emissary for the god or gods that are in play, both delivering messages between the gods and from gods to man, right? So we got to keep that straight. When we say angel, we immediately think of this picture and stuff like that. But really, it's a role. It could look all different ways in all different mythologies and religions and structures that we've created. But the role is what defines it as what the word we say angel, right? According to what the word actually means, right? And then we've turned into a figure, basically. These Sumerian messengers were depicted with wings and often a mix of human and animal characteristics. And so this continues because the next kind of, like ancient Babylon kind of took the Sumerian pantheon and religion and tweaked it. You see that's how everything happened, right? And it becomes regionalized, and their culture and their things, their traditions and things that they develop start to change it and their ideas and stuff like that, right?
To remind, geographically, where is ancient Babylon?
Iraq.
Okay.
We call it Iraq today.
Right.
As the ancient Babylonians took the pantheon and religion of the earlier Sumerian culture and adapted it to their own, they included figures they called Apkallu. I think that's right. These essentially took the place of the Anunnaki, as they had kept Enki as their chief god. So they kept the same god. Happened a lot, right? They're like, oh yeah, Enki's still a god. They just kind of like created a little different kind of thing vibe happened around them. And their kind of divine messengers were called the Apkallu, right? So they were benevolent messengers sent by Enki to impart wisdom and teach culture to humanity. They are often depicted as having human bodies with bird heads, or sometimes with the head of a human and the body of a fish, or maybe like a cloak simulating a fish body. This actually shows up in the Old Testament as well. There's a time when they refer to, I believe the god's name is Dagon, which was basically a god that had, a fish body and a human head sometimes, or sometimes reversed.
Lends toward mermaids.
I mean, yeah, whatever. There's all kinds of mythology because we're out in the ocean and it's this vast, deep, dark thing, and we start seeing things, and so there's a lot of mythology that evolves around kind of like that mix between that. But this was like something that was common in Babylonian religion and ancient Babylonian religion, was this kind of connection with fish and gods looking like fish. And so these Apkallu, these divine messengers, these angels, as we would call them, would often look like that. Just like the Sumerians, they kind of had a mix of animal and, kind of human characteristics. Same thing's going on, obviously, in Babylon, because they just kind of took theirs and tweaked it into a Babylonian version of the Sumerian kind of ideas. So their role as mediators between a god and humankind makes them angels, again in English. In addition, they had figures they called Shidu that were usually depicted. Now, you've seen these before. Like if you've seen pictures of ancient Babylonian artifacts, there are a bunch still in Iraq, right? You'll see these gates, and there's like, they have the body of like a lion and the head of a man and the wings of an eagle. Have you ever seen those? Okay, so those are the Shidu. And what they represent are kind of like maybe what we would call guardian angels, right? They kind of operate on behalf of the gods, for mankind's sake, protecting against evil spirits and all that kind of stuff, like a guardian angel type character, right? And then they had a counterpart. They're kind of the male version. The female version were called the Lamasu, which was they just took a goddess that existed in Sumerian religion called Lama, and she was adapted into this angelic figure, and her role was literally to take the prayers of the people of mankind and bring them up to the gods, a messenger. Okay, and that makes her an angel as well. And so they kind of had this male female dichotomy, one being the warrior, the other being kind of taking these messages and these compassion and these very feminine versus masculine things happening here, obviously. But together they both represent what we would call an angel. They serve that role as that emissary between the god. In ancient Egypt, they had the concept of the Bao, which were celestial beings considered manifestations of the divine, serving as messengers and representatives of the gods to man. Or in English, we would call them angels, right? That's what they were. Egypt also had the concept of the Ak, and so this is interesting. The Ak was when you died, your spirit departed from you. That was the Ak, the disembodied spirit of a dead person. And they believed that would float up to the heavens and dwell in the place with the gods and work for him, protecting and guiding the humans who are left behind. We still have this legacy in many popular beliefs where you even see like bumper stickers on car. Our little angel is watching over it, right? We have that kind of idea, whether we believe it or not.
Their past loved ones watching over them and taking care of them, or speaking to them, or guiding them, or something.
Exactly.
It's just.
But that idea goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, right?
All of this makes sense to me from my studies in hypnotherapy and what soothes the mind. And if we can tell the mind things, it will calm down. And so you have these stories to calm the mind in our experience and our existence.
Right.
Because there's a lot to be anxious about.
Yep. But when it comes to ancient belief influencing the development of Judaic and Christian ideas around angels, there is a religion that stands above the rest. You see, nothing formed the ideas that would shape Judaism and then Christianity quite like, what religion do you think? We've talked about it. In the last Christmas episodes, this will seem like, man, that's all he talks about. But it's been 3 years since I talked about this. So just so you know.
Wait, so you're asking...
Starts with a Z.
Zoroastrianism.
That's right. I mean, this is, if you want to know where we got most of the shit that we believe in our religions, especially in the West, and Islam too, by the way, Zoroastrianism is absolutely the source of it. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit about it here just to kind of review before we get into like how they've played into the whole angel idea in Christianity and Judaism. So just to quickly review, whoa, that's a hard word to say. Zoroastrianism was a religion founded by Zarathustra, right? That was his Persian name. In Greece, he was known as Zoroaster, and so that's why we say it, because our language largely we didn't come from the Persian, it came from the Greek, right? So he lived in ancient Persia during the 5th century. It's one of the earliest known monotheistic religions humanity has ever created, and it had a huge impact on the religions that would develop and later dominate the Western world even today.
Interesting. It's the first monotheistic?
Yeah, so, I mean, I say that
known.
It's the first known truly monotheistic religion. There were other religions that definitely maybe elevated gods, but they didn't fit the the qualifications to truly to
Yeah,
be
because in
monotheistic.
monotheistic, it's like actually evil to even consider there being more than one.
Right, exactly. They elevate one, and it's like this is the only one true God, and
It's
so
different from elevating one and going, well, they're all gods, but this one's the
right,
best god.
right.
Different.
Now Egypt did have that rise up also, but not. It didn't have the impact on the religions of what has become our world, like Zoroastrianism did, and I believe it was after that, and so. He's kind of credited as creating monotheism as a true philosophy. Not that he created whole cloth, right? He borrowed from other things, we'll see. But he formulated into a religion that we would call monotheistic, which then led to the religions we have now and the whole concept of that being one God, and all that kind of stuff came from him. Before that, they're like, one God, Jesus Christ. You need like fucking millions of them. They didn't see Jesus Christ yet. But I mean, like, they're like, future Jesus Christ, like. They're like, you have a bunch of gods. You can't have one God. Look at, there's a bunch of shit happening. They all gotta like take care. You can't have one. And he's come around like going, no, just one, kind of thing. So Zoroaster brought some novel ideas to the fore. First, he recast all of the divine beings from the pagan Persian beliefs that existed kind of in his day and before him, which were actually taken from Hinduism. So he took that's right there, India and what we call Iran now, but like Persia. And so they kind of had a lot of similarities in the religion. And he kind of took all the gods that existed in I should say, the Persian pagans had kind of taken the gods from Hinduism and kind of flipped them and tweaked them and put them into different categories. But it wasn't like good and bad, right? It was just like they just recategorized their gods and kind of invented some new ones that were very Persian specific.
We could all get along.
I know.
Because it's so interesting. Like we just kind of like hang around each other and share ideas. I'm talking because you're talking about Iran and India and there's so much charge and angst and hatred and evil going around between being divided from those people, and I hate that.
I know.
It's dumb. It's just...
I know. So anyway, he took those and he kind of took all. So as he has his whole little thing going on, his teachings, he takes all of these gods that existed in these Persian pagan beliefs, and he began to recast them as different characters, right? He elevated one guy we'll talk about in a second, one deity to be the main only god. And then everyone else kind of got demoted into other roles, right? And so he turned those into servants, mostly representatives or emanations of the only true God among them, a deity he elevated named Ahura Mazda.
Heard of him?
Right. He imagined the world as a cosmic struggle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness.
Duality.
Right. It was dualistic, right? It was one of those very first dualistic philosophies that we encounter. This set the scene for some major religious ideas to enter the human imagination. First off, if you have a battle with two sides, you need a good place and a bad place that they either live and rule from or go to when they die, right? You need bases. Right. When kingdoms fight, they've got capitals and forts and fortresses that they center on.
And your place is the good place and their place is the bad
Of course, right? Our modern concept of heaven and hell come directly from these developments in ancient Persia. According to Zarathustra, the righteous ascended to the house of song. What do they say we're going to be doing in heaven all the time? Singing. Interesting that it says we're going to be singing. I always thought, this sounds boring as fuck. I used to hear pastors, especially these old guys, and they'd just be like, well, if you don't like praising the Lord and singing, well, you're going to have a long heaven. I'm like, so you're saying heaven? You're threatening me with a boring heaven. You're telling me that I could be bored in heaven because I don't like to sing these fucking songs all the time, Anyway, the house of song. That's the good place, right? Heaven, we would call it, right? While the wicked were consigned to the house of lies, where they experience eternal suffering and regret, right?
Interesting.
Hell, what's Satan called? The father of what?
Father of
Lies, right? Interesting. Also, if you have these two forces fighting a battle and you got the good place and the bad place, what do you need? You need an evil supervillain for your good super god to fight against. This role was played by a figure named Angra Mainyu, later known as Ahriman, who was the prototype from which the Judeo-Christian Satan would be developed. Also, if you're going to fight a war, you need soldiers and loyal followers to carry out your will. And so many figures that were once seen as deities in early Persian belief were turned into what we would call angels and demons. Zoroaster referred to the good angels as the Amisha Spenta, which essentially translates to bounteous immortals. Many of these figures had names and specific purposes. For example, a figure named Vohumana was the divine messenger who served Ahura Mazda by bringing Zoroaster messages regarding the true nature of God and his covenant with mankind. Literally no different than the shit that goes down in the Old Testament. You see the same shit play out, right? Why does God show up? Well, to tell this guy that he's fucking telling him the truth and everyone else is wrong. And so now, that whole thing. Same thing was in there. Before that, Zoroastrians set this tone, right?
Yeah.
So Judaism obviously played a role in our view of angels as well as our modern Western Christian ideas evolved directly out of it. The interesting thing is that when you look at early pre-exile Jewish writing, so writing before they end up being kicked out of Israel and winding up dispersed through all these empires, right? The Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Persians. I mean, going all the way back to like...
When was
7th century BC, all the
out?
way through Rome. Well, until 1947.
No, I know. No, I said when were they originally kicked out?
Oh, back in like the 8th or 7th, 8th century. The interesting thing is that when you look at early pre-exile Jewish writing, it actually has no real concept of anything we would refer to as angels, right? It doesn't show up. However, during the periods of exile and rule by foreign empires, Jewish religious ideas would significantly change as the predominant ruling culture, philosophies, and religions were absorbed into their own. You can't help it.
Yeah.
Right? You just soak up the water you're swimming in. It changes the way you think. You add it to your own. It evolves and grows, and you just can't help but, to a certain extent, take on the culture you're in, right? In fact, I would say a huge part of the Bible is God coming to these people and telling them not to do this. Okay? Because it was so apparent to them. Because they saw that this happened every time. That the Greeks take over and all of a sudden all the young Jews want to do Greek shit.
Yeah.
They want to talk about Greek ideas and Greek things. And so the people writing the scriptures are, casting God is coming down and saying, like, stop doing that, stay a Jew, right? And we're gonna see this today, even in some stories, but that's a common theme because that is just a fact that we tend to, adapt and take on the predominant culture that's happening.
And what is the drive in us to make a God that would tell us not to? Like, why? There's some like this inclination to assimilate, and then also this drive to fight it.
It's the same impulse. It's that trying to maintain an identity. So you have the conservative kind of part of that populace of the Jewish people, the descendants of Israel, who had been kicked out of their land, temples destroyed. Not allowed to do all this stuff. And so it was kind of this idea of like, we need to regain our identity. That is what going back to Israel in 1947 was all about too, by the way. So like we were saying, during periods of Jewish exile, into these foreign lands and being ruled by these empires and cultures, Jewish religious ideas would significantly change as the predominant ruling culture, philosophies, and religions were absorbed into their own. Babylonian influences would integrate into their philosophies and ideas during the 6th century, which was followed by the Persian Empire conquering Babylon and ruling over the Jewish people after that. And what did the Persians bring to the table during this time period? A culture steeped in Zoroastrianism, right? They were the Persians. And by then, Zoroastrianism had become the fucking religion of Persia. And so now the Jews are living in Persian lands, and even if they're living in other lands, they're being ruled by Persians, populated by Persian people all around them, bringing their Persian ideas, philosophies, religions, gods, mythologies.
So wait, let me track. The monotheistic was in Persia. Zoroastrianism was in Persia.
Yes.
And the Jews were not monotheistic at that time.
So, no. Like, okay, this is a big debate. Okay. What we need to understand is...
like, heresy!
What we need to understand is much of the things that were written down, much of the Jewish beliefs, history, all this stuff that we call the Bible, say, wasn't compiled until this time, the 5th, 4th centuries. Hold on, listen to me, BC, which means whatever the stories were before then, whatever had been made up prior in ancient Israelite history, it was now being translated and formulated in a different culture, right? It's kind of like if someone sat down to write the Declaration of Independence today, it would not sound or look like, because we have a different culture and a different idea, and so it would be translated through that.
So they had whatever, we don't even know because it wasn't written down.
Well, I mean, the very beginning of the Bible opens up with basically the gods are sitting around having a council and wondering what to do. The word Elohim is plural. So I'm saying there certainly was polytheism, because Israel's religion early on, the most ancient... the most ancient form of the Israelite religion was just the Canaanite religion, which was just the fucking Sumerian religion, essentially. Like, it was very similar. And so they just had... They had a pantheon of gods. But the Bible was kind of compiled, and these stories...
Bible, but...
Old Testament,
Torah.
whatever, the Old Testament.
Because the Torah.
Those are, that's just the first, that's the books of the law. That's not the Bible.
So the Old Testament was, is that all, that was all Judeo writing?
Yeah. And it was put together probably all the way into almost the 1st century AD. Okay, so the Old Testament was compiled in cultures and philosophical ideas, and understand this is over hundreds of years. So it's not like there's this rolling influence, this gradual thing that changes, and so you can see that reflected in the Bible, and you can see where they're pulling from their current situation and the current ideas and stuff that's happening around them where they're at.
So I think my question was, we don't know, they didn't seem, we don't, whatever they believe, but the first writings that we have of monotheism is in Persia. Did I get that right?
I think you're looking for something very specific, like on this day, monotheism was founded. It didn't happen like that.
No.
I'll say this. Monotheism...
I'm just saying it didn't originate in Judaism, because Judaism seems to claim that they are the originators of monotheism.
No scholar believes that. Okay.
I'm just clarifying
Everybody believes their shit is the best shit.
No, I know, but I'm just clarifying that because I've always been taught, and I know that many of them believe...
People also teach you
that they have always been monotheistic. That's what differentiated them from all of the cultures around them. That's why they fought them. That's why this whole thing...
That is how you get people in your cult. How did Zoroaster get people in his cult? Oh, this is the real stuff because God told me, right? And so you always have to be the one that is first right. I'm also told all the time by people how Hebrew was the first language ever invented. Bullshit. That is not true whatsoever. However, it makes it very magical and very cool and very like this, right? And so then, everyone wants Hebrew involved in their magical number system or whatever, right? So people believe a lot of things and say a lot of things, but that's just because that's branding, right? In reality, monotheism largely entered our human consciousness through Zoroaster and what he developed as a religion, which then dominated Persia and became the religion, right? To the point that, like we talked about in previous episodes about Christmas, when the Magi were visiting in the Gospels, that word Magi was literally Zoroastrian priests. They were astrologers that were Zoroastrian priests. Like, that's how it was. That was the religion of Persia. Yeah. Well, now the Jews live in Persia because they conquered Babylon, right? And so now they're under Persian rule. And what did Persia bring? Zoroastrianism and all of these ideas and these new things which began to shape and formulate what would become Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so, so they lived in a culture steeped in Zoroastrianism with its monotheism, ideas of heaven and hell, and the need for supernatural beings such as angels to deliver messages, guidance, and warnings from God to man. Due to this saturation in Persian belief, Jewish writing after this period is marked by a very formalized and developed view of angels. So prior to their exile years, like early stuff, they didn't really have any kind of concept of an angel. It wasn't part of their thing. However, after they spend time underneath this Zoroastrian kind of influence, which very much had this concept of intermediaries, God sending man messages through these supernatural, entities and beings and things like that, personages with names even. Next thing you know, Jewish writing very much incorporates that, and they have their whole Jewish idea of how that works. Yeah. Why? Because they were in that culture, and they go like, well, we need to adapt this into ours. And it didn't happen like one day. They didn't have a meeting, right? It was like slow.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I mean, it's hard to go like over 3 centuries because we don't have a concept of what that's like. But just like us, we got here. We look nothing like colonial America. That was only fucking 250 years ago or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So the concept of the figure of an angel in human religion goes back all the way to the earliest examples and evidence we have. They were not the invention of Christianity or even Judaism, and the Bible is simply a repurposing of earlier beliefs and ideas, right? The Bible just contains a collection of stuff that was adapted through various cultural exchanges and all that kind of shit. So Christian angelology, though, that's what we need to talk about, because when it comes to Christmas, we got to talk about the fucking Christians, right? Because supposedly that's what it's all about, right? Is that we didn't have Christmas until December 21st, the year 25th, the year 0. I'm sorry, that's the winter solstice, which actually is what fucking Christmas is. But yeah, they went like, oh, the year AD 0, December 25th, that's when Christmas started. Like, okay. No, but when it comes to Christmas, and our traditions around Christmas in the West especially, we got to talk about Christianity. So when we're talking about angels and Christians, we need to delve a little further into kind of how that shit went down. As we have already covered, the Christian concept of angels comes to us through Judaism, which had formed under the heavy Zoroastrian influence during that period of exile, as, they were just soaking in that whole world. We have to remember these details and doctrines and theologies developed over time, influenced by very human factors that played into their formulation and symbolism. This is true for everything Christians believe as well. It was not delivered as a fully formed system or package because it came directly from God. It's a man-made religion, like all the others, which has evolved and added to over very long spans of time based on cultural pressures, influences, and requirements. Okay. Again, in the church, we kind of are raised in this idea that, Jesus came down and handed us all this. Yeah. Gave us a hymnal, it was all numbered and everything already, and this full set of beliefs, and everything that we believe came out of the mouth of Jesus. Not even close. He said very little of the shit that the church actually has gone on to make doctrine, dogma, beliefs, ideas.
He said?
Jesus. When you look at the words of Jesus,
you can get very attributed to
whatever. In their religion, if you look at Jesus and what he said, it's not that much.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Right? So what they've done is like, well, he said a bunch of other stuff too. So we'll talk a little about how this plays into Christmas and angels and shit like that, because the Bible says very little about the birth of Jesus, very little about angels, to be honest. Yeah. But there's some other shit that fleshed out a lot of the stuff that is now believed in Christianity, which actually doesn't come from anything that they would consider holy or sacred or God-given or whatever at all. So when it comes to angels, this evolving idea of what they are, what they do, and how they fit into the overall Christian mythos evolved primarily by the influence of some prominent church leaders. They are commonly referred to as the early church fathers, and represent a collection of leaders from a variety of backgrounds that all contributed ideas and philosophical details to things being debated or wondered about in the church at large. So early on in the church, there were some figures, scholars. I mean, this was a world that highly prized education and debate and scholarship and things like that. And there were certain men, not all men. There were also women that were influential, but they don't get talked about much because that's
they don't count.
We hide that. But when it comes to like a lot of the influence came from some very early prominent figures that rose up, were very good at writing, were very prolific, were probably rich. Which allow them to do this shit also.
Have the time to think about this
so
shit?
they didn't represent like the brain trust of Christianity at the time, but they do represent the ones that actually got this shit out and they had influence on the church. So let's take a look at a few and talk about kind of how things went down. So I want to kind of briefly talk about a few guys that played into the overall picture of angels in Christianity. Remember, this is all happening after supposedly the Bible's written, right? This is not divinely inspired or anything like that. These are just dudes fucking talking, okay? And yet we'll find, oh, I've heard that before. He said that? I thought that was in the Bible somewhere, kind of thing. One of the most influential of these early fathers was a guy named Augustine of Hippo. You've heard him.
Yep.
Saint Augustine. He's a saint, of course, But Saint Augustine of Hippo. He was born to a Christian mom in 354 CE. However...
CE.
Okay, we've talked about this before.
I know, but remind.
Instead of saying after death and before Christ, right?
Right.
Now it's the Common Era
Oh, right.
and before the Common Era.
Right.
So instead of saying 354 AD, we'll just say CE, right?
Okay, well, you've used all of it, AD, BC.
Oh,
so
yeah,
CE
because
was
everybody,
thrown.
whatever. But
Okay.
I'm sure it's my fault what happened just right now. However,
I'm clarifying for the listeners.
Okay. However, like any rebellious child, he grew up and chose a different religion than his mom at first. So his mom's kind of a crazy Christian woman, we'll find out. She's like that weird Christian mom that people have, that's like praying for their salvation, and all this, trying to fucking constantly get them in church and shit.
Stop.
Well, so he grows up like that. And so, of course, when he comes of age, he like goes, I'm not going to be a Christian. I'm going to be something else. Right? Bums his mom out. But he actually first became an adherent of what is known as Manichaeism. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I taught it in church history a long time ago.
No, that's why I've heard the word.
Okay.
Because I was in your church history class.
Yeah, that's right. So it's called that because of its founder, a 3rd century CE, again, right? 3rd century traveling preacher whose name was Mani, right? And so it's called Manichaeism. I don't know how the fuck you pronounce it.
Yeah.
His name was Manny. I don't know. One of those. And he was traveling around Persia. What's Persia known for, by the way? Starts with a Z.
Zoroastrianism.
right. We're going to
to
see he just kind of tweaked that shit. And
Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's going to continue to have some kind of influence, even indirectly, right?
Okay. Yeah.
His story is like so many we have heard from new religious leaders throughout history and continuing on even to today. He claims he was told by God that all the faiths out there were wrong and that he would be entrusted with the real religion and the correct shit about God, right? We've heard this.
That's where we got this.
When you start a new religion that sounds a lot like the existing ones, you have to differentiate somehow.
Yeah.
And by claiming you received the edits from God, or, as we will see, one of his representatives, you have the origin story you need to drag people into your new faith. We see this in all kinds of religions that have cropped up, not the least of which is Mormonism, right? Mormonism was founded by a guy who went out and supposedly was met by who? The angel Moroni. And what did he do? He delivered a message. And what did he say to Joseph? All the
Those
Christian
other
churches
ones are
are fucking wrong. Here's the real shit. Here's some golden plates, right? And then he creates his religion with that as the origin story. This is exactly what Manny did, and it's what probably millions of people that we never heard about have done, right?
Yeah.
This is how you do it. When you start a cult, you'd be like, yeah, man, like they were close, but they didn't really understand how the universe is vibrating, how to align to it. See, I've been downloaded from the universe through ascended master, same fucking shit.
Yeah.
And so that's what Manny did. He's like, hey. I know you guys have been believing this, but you're close, so close,
So close.
but not there. I've got the full-on
Yeah.
real deal. And so, like I said, Joseph Smith just pulled the same fucking bullshit, and it worked fabulously. Jesus Christ,
Works every time.
right? In Manny's case, he recounted how a divine messenger, what's that? What is a messenger?
An angel.
Fucking angel visited him and communicated the truth of God to him. He referred to this messenger as his twin, sometimes, his double, sometimes he referred to him as that, his protective angel, guardian angel, you could say, or whatever, his divine self, and his syzygy, which is probably, you've heard it, but most people are probably like, what the fuck? If you're not in like philosophical circles, or maybe have never taken that in college or read books on maybe Gnosticism or something like that, you probably haven't heard that word. So probably the...
Did I hear that word in the church history?
Yeah. And so early on in the church, one of the biggest competition religions to Christianity, or I shouldn't say that, one of the branches of Christianity that was most popular and the biggest threat to kind of what became mainstream Christianity, or whatever you want to call it, was Gnosticism, right? And Gnosticism was Greek philosophy that already existed, this idea, but then they kind of blended Christianity into it, right? If you read the letters of Paul in the New Testament, he uses tons of Gnostic language to the point where some people believe he was a Gnostic, right?
Yeah.
And so Gnostic Christianity was very, very popular. And in the Gnostic idea, they had this cosmology that had these pairs of figures, typically a male and female kind of masculine, feminine kind of duality, these figures that they named like grace and hope and this and that, right? They had all these names for it, all in the Bible, by the way, and using the actual words that they used. And together, you can kind of think of a ladder of these pairs, right? And together they create God's will, right? They create things according to God's will. And all together, they make up what's called the pleroma, which translates to the fullness of God.
Yep.
And so these syzygies are literally emanations of the one true God. It was still monotheistic because it was Christianity, right?
Okay, so it was the way that they integrated the multi-gods under one God.
Right.
By saying it's the one God, but
one
with
God,
these syzygies.
And these are all just pieces and emanations and facets, right? Well, along the line, and they're called syzygies, them individually, right? And so pairs of it translates to spouse or partner.
Oh.
Okay, so think of them as like married to each other, and they produce God's will, whatever that is, whatever they're to create.
Oh, okay.
Well, sometime back in the ancient past, right, before the foundations of the world, one of them decided, fuck you, I'm doing it myself. Okay? Not going to have a
Gotta
wife.
be
Fuck
one
that.
asshole.
Right. And he's credited, and he's known as the demiurge.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of
He's credited with creating the physical world.
Oh, yes.
Now, many Christian Gnostic sects also believed that the demiurge is the same character as Yahweh in the Old Testament, which meant a lot of them became intensely anti-Semitic. Right.
Wait, what? Why?
A lot of because they're worshiping the God that created this fucking world, and this world is evil. The physical world that the demiurge created, because he did it on his own, and he didn't have that balance, right? It wasn't done through this pairing, which is God's will for this, like these two entities to work together. He did it on his own.
It was the rebellious
without that balance,
asshole coming from that was an emanation or a syzygy of the main God.
No, it's not that. It's that. It's so confusing, and I'm sure I'm not even fucking close to being totally correct on this, and there's people out there that fucking know so much about this shit. But what I'm saying is, just imagine they're supposed to create things in pairs.
Okay.
One of them decides not to.
Yeah.
What he ends up creating is the world we live in. And literally we are trapped
the God that we're
in it.
supposedly as Christians or Jews. That's the one that they chose as their God.
That's not what happened. It's not that the Jews chose him as
not that they chose him. What I'm saying, I just mean that's the character that they're actually
He's the bad guy in their cosmology, and the
Right.
Jews worship him, and he cares about the Jews.
Okay.
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 And so they don't fucking like him because in most Gnostic ideas, anything to do with
So
the physical.
that
Hold
is-
on.
Sorry.
Anything to do. Jesus.
I'm trying to follow it.
I'm trying to get you to where you. How are you going to follow if I'm not?
I gotta verbalize it. Okay, go.
Verbalize. Listen to me and think about this first.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then
Okay. Okay.
the physical in many Gnostic circles, most probably, especially in Christian Gnosticism, the physical, the material pleasure
Yeah, it's bad.
is bad. It's not just bad, it's against God. It's not leading to your. So in Gnosticism, you're like, it's kind of like a secret society, a club. You ascend through these levels, right? They have names. You're
No, I
an
know,
initiate.
yeah,
You're a
yeah.
prefect. You're all these things. And the whole idea is to, through gnosis, and the
Yeah.
way that you achieve gnosis is by denying the flesh and living to the spirit, which is what Paul writes about constantly, right? So that's why I say he's likely a Gnostic, or at least very influenced by that. And so if the demiurge is Yahweh, and he rebelliously created this evil world that now we all have to fight against to get back to God. See, that's the idea, is that we're trapped in this world.
Yeah.
And now I have to do all this work to get back to God through denying the flesh, blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so a lot of anti-Semitism popped up because they're like, fuck the Jews, like, because the demiurge and all that kind of shit. To the point that when the Bible was formulated, they had to do it because a bunch of anti-Semitic kind of teachers were saying shit and saying this is from God. And so people were like, oh, that's scripture. And so they had to define what it was so they could stop people from fucking doing shit that was taking things in the wrong direction, maybe, kind of thing. We'll talk about the Bible and how it was invented and everything in the future. But needless to say, one of the factors that caused us to have to close down, I shouldn't say us, caused the church to believe they needed to close scripture. Like, everyone wants to
Close the
know, like, why
canon.
doesn't God talk to us anymore?
Right.
Why doesn't he write shit anymore?
Right.
Well, because the church decided, nope, it's done. God already did it all. He's not going to add any more. This is
Yeah.
it. Why? Well, because things were getting out of hand and people
Yes.
were showing up on the
Lots of-
scene and going
yeah.
like, hey, I've listened to the Holy Spirit, and so I'm just as good as the Bible or the scriptures or whatever. And then so they had to go like, whoa, okay, we got to define this is the Bible. You aren't. And one of the factors was a lot of anti-Semitic stuff, to where they were even chopping up some of the gospel accounts that were floating around because the Jews kept showing up in it, and they're like, fuck the Jews. And so they're, anything that showed any kind of favor or any kind of plan for them, they didn't like. Oh, okay. We were talking about Manichaeism, though. Okay. Mani, remember the traveling
Mani,
preacher,
okay.
right? And the reason we're talking about that, to go back, because we got way off track, was Augustine became one. Remember, he was born to a Christian mom, 354, and instead of becoming a Christian, he chose this Manichaeism, or however you say that. I'm going to say it like 25 different ways, and one of them we write. So Manichaeism kind of straddles Zoroastrianism and early Christianity, especially Gnostic forms of Christianity that were prevalent and plentiful in the first few centuries of his existence. Though with Mithra playing the role of savior instead of Jesus, right? Remember Mithra, who is Jesus.
Yeah.
Christmas, also, by the way, his birthday was December 25th.
Yeah.
Before Jesus was that, by the way.
Yeah,
So Mithra was in the mix and not Jesus, but it had a lot of similarities, right? Again, it's pulling in ideas that are floating out there. You got to keep it relevant.
Yeah.
You don't hear about this Christian shit, and you got a little your Zoroastrian stuff, and like, let's make something new that people will get on board with. His religion included the intense spiritual warfare between good and evil on earth, played out by supernatural entities serving the good and bad leaders, as well as heaven and hell paradigm brought in by Zarathustra hundreds of years earlier. Many taught that the righteous would return to paradise when they died, while the, quote, soul of the person who persisted in things of the flesh, fornication, procreation. He didn't even want you to have a kid, right? Don't put your dick in anything. Don't fucking have a kid. Possessions, owning stuff, cultivation, working fields, harvesting, eating of meat, drinking of wine. These are all like, anyone who does these things they're condemned to rebirth in a success of bodies. So you can kind of see he like brings in a little bit of reincarnation flavor, and essentially
Like,
what it's saying
if
is,
you participate in this world, you're going to have to keep coming back into it, but you need to ascend and not participate in it.
right,
Be like a monk or like ascetic or all those different things. Like separate yourself away, separate from society and culture and everything. We see this today still happening. We've seen it all for thousands of years. This idea, and so you have to separate away to evolve and ascend. And if you participate, then you're lower. You're going to repeat.
right.
You're contributing to the evil.
And you brought up something great.
Oh,
You brought up something
God.
amazing right there when you said the ascetic and the monks and that whole thing. Okay. This was a thing in the early church that took hold that Augustine was very into. He celebrated these famous fucking weirdos who like sat on pillars out in the desert and didn't eat or bathe or whatever. They're shitting off this post and people are going and watching them. He venerated that because of this influence.
Yeah.
And the Bible also
Yeah.
carries with it a lot of this Gnostic-y influence in it, right? You see the same thing in the Bible, these, you know.
I still see it today, even in
Yeah.
our New Age world, our like hippie world, our the spiritualist world. Like this idea that you have to get out of culture, get out of society to really ascend into higher ways of being. You have to like shun.
Yeah, yeah. So to Mani and to Augustine as he became an adherent of
But it
this.
just shows. I'm sorry. It just shows where that root is from. Like, why are people doing it? It's inbred in our culture, so it's in our
Yeah.
minds.
And it's maybe even like a part of us as humans. Like maybe there's social things involved in there. I don't know. But all that combined, yes. And largely our philosophies have. I should
Because
say,
it's-
hold on. I should say our culture is based on philosophies that included this ascetic.
Yeah.
The physical is inferior to the spiritual
Yes.
idea.
Yes. So even people that would say that they're like different from Christianity, that they're better, that they are more enlightened than Christianity, they're still pushing the same bullshit at me that Christianity did, and that's what frustrates me.
And I would say, because in the Western world especially, all of our ideas, I don't care if my favorite thing is when someone says like, well, I don't believe in Western religion. I read books about Buddhism. I'm like, yeah, Buddhism written for fucking Western people.
Yeah.
Because this is the world we're in.
Yeah.
And our world was defined so much by Zoroastrianism, right? And its offshoots.
The thing is, it's hard to be.
So we have a lot of common stuff floating around because we all have the same philosophical framework. We're just building different ideas and fucking brands out of that stuff.
We're social creatures, so we're drawn to it, and it's also hard to be
Right.
amongst
So we want to escape it.
people. So it's almost like we hate that we're drawn to it, so we kind of like self-righteously stand above it by trying to shun it and say that that's better, rather than do the work of being among people and what that takes. And I think that develops us more than this like going off and shunning society. Be a part of society and do the work of being a better people together. That's the work to do. That's the practice. That's the spiritual discipline.
Yeah, yeah. And just I think we have it's crazy. But the reason why we hear so much of this stuff in just repackaged in different forms is because this is what just like they had what they had to work with, we have what we have to work with.
People were doing this. We're dealing with
doing
the
the
same
same
inner
fucking
stuff
shit.
over and over and over.
We'll see how much in a minute. Like it's crazy how common when we get to Christmas and stuff, and you're just like, oh Jesus, might as well fucking be now, kind of thing. So let's see where Augustine wasn't alone either. In fact, while Manichaeism was flourishing, it represented the most successful rival to Christianity during its time, finding its way all over the world, including as far away as southern China. there's evidence that Manichaeism was held by certain communities all the way up through the 14th century there, with some scholars asserting that there's evidence that Mani's teachings still remain in various forms in certain Chinese communities. So this was a successful, it was not a little regional thing. Augustine wasn't hopping on board some little ragtag band. This was a major movement that had drawn a lot of big thinkers because these religions were highly philosophical. They were meant to be these ladders that you climb that had to be they're intensifying in their difficulty to get to these stages, right? And so it drew a lot of thinkers and stuff because the religion was very much that kind of philosophical kind of idea. That was kind of the vibe then, right? We think of religion now not as philosophy. We think of it as faith and belief and shit like that. But it's just philosophy. It's just a way to view the world. It's a way that we're imagining the world works according to the experience we're having. And back then, philosophy it was up front. It was exactly what they were after, and it just happened to be the philosophy of God, right? And trying to figure that out. So, Augustine, he's a Manichaean, right? And, he's kind of super into this whole thing. And he winds up, now he's a student. He's seen as incredibly brilliant. He's very promising. There was a lot of schools, most of them these Gnostic schools. That was typically where you would go to, is this kind of Gnostic kind of center where you would learn. And he definitely stood out as someone who was especially capable and good at rhetoric, which was a very vaunted thing then, right? Oratory, speaking, be able to defend something, be able to question, debate, communicate ideas.
Should still be.
I know. But this was a classical world that was still very much enamored by...
So glad I trained sent my
I know our
kids to
kids
learn
went
this.
to classical, yeah. They'll have a different view about that, but they were lucky that they went to that.
Not because of the religion part of it, but because it was a good education.
Right. So let me see if I can summarize this from memory. I don't know. We'll find out. So Augustine of Hippo, that's what we're talking about. Okay, but to get to how he brought in his contribution to like Christian angelology, right, which is the study of like angels in Christian religion, right, and the role they play and kind of their development and shit like that. So he, I think he's in Carthage and he's in school essentially, right? And he kind of leads a hedonistic life. He's hanging out with dudes in the locker room and they're talking about all the dudes and chicks they fucked and like this wild lifestyle and partying. And he wants to belong and fit in. And so he starts hooking up with this young woman. A young woman who he'll actually fall madly in love with and be with for 15 years, even have a kid with, right? Now, his mom is sending him messages saying, avoid fornication, right? But he's like, I'm going to fuck this girl. And so he's in Carthage. And again, he kind of rises to some prominence there. He definitely stands out. He's very eloquent. He's very able. He's got a good memory and a good grasp and able to like, ably hold his own against even his mentors and instructors. So while he's in Carthage, in the school and all this stuff, he's there for years and he is constantly thinking, constantly, trying to wrap his mind around everything. And so he kind of, any kind of Manichaean thinker or prominent person in that religion, he seeks out, and there's a lot of them. I mean, this is a popular religion at the time, and so he seeks them out and throws questions at them and stuff. And they're like, I don't know, dude, you're asking me some crazy questions. However, this dude is coming. His name's Faustus, and he is known as like the best fucking Manichaean apologist, essentially, like the best guy to talk to. He's got all the answers, right? So he shows up. And Augustine's like, awesome. And so he goes and he comes away from it very disillusioned because the way he puts it is he didn't so much answer my questions as very eloquently dodged them and avoided answering any of them because he didn't know and wasn't able to even understand probably what Augustine was throwing at him. Augustine's pretty good at this point. And so Augustine's just like, he just was really good at sounding great while he said nothing. I didn't get the answers, but it was an amazing display of, rhetorical stuff and oration, but they didn't answer my question. And so he starts to kind of lose faith in the whole Manichaean thing and starts to fall apart for him. And eventually ends up in Rome. And why is in Rome? A kind of newer movement has taken hold that's called Neoplatonism. We call it Christianity today, but they called it Neoplatonism at the time. There was both at the time, but now today, largely because of these kinds of situations with Augustine getting enamored with this philosophy, since our Christian traditions are built upon writings such as his, of course, we have these ties. But Neoplatonism was very, very, very close, in a lot of the stuff that we have in modern Christianity, you can find in Neoplatonism, and there certainly was a huge, and it wasn't just him. There was tons of church fathers and women, very influential women actually, in like Alexandria, Egypt. That was a culture where women weren't so held down and weren't so, not that they had equality necessarily, but they would listen to them if they were smart there. Except, unlike other parts of the world, like, fucking, over in Rome where they're like, women, it's just fucking no. And so this was a prevalent philosophy that spread around the Roman world, and Neoplatonism was essentially kind of a newfangled kind of way of looking at Platonism. It held, like, maybe one of the most famous things that people know about Platonic ideas, and something that the Neoplatonists definitely brought in was, he believed that there was kind of two worlds that existed, right? This world is just an attempt at symbolizing or representing or presenting the real world, the perfect world, the world of forms. In other words, that building over there, maybe I shouldn't use that. That seems weird. That tree over there, there's a world of forms where the perfect version of that tree, exactly what that tree is, its essence, what it's supposed to be, is present. In this world, it's just like a projection of that world that's lost some of it. And so we're seeing an imperfect, corrupted, you could say, view. Okay, a lot of people fucking believe this today. We're living in a simulation, or there's this happening, and this is just a reflection of what's really going on behind the scene. And when I take mushrooms, I can see it because my eyes change. You're like, what? No, but these are ideas that now Augustine is kind of vibing with, right? He's like, this is cool. And so he's in Rome, and while he's there again, he becomes very well known for being this guy that can just, he's got a great grasp of this classical skill and knowledge of rhetoric, of just being able to discuss and debate and all these things. And so the imperial court in Milan is looking for an instructor, right, in rhetoric. They would often do that. They would bring in these learned people and these scholars to teach the rich people their stuff, right? And so he ends up getting the job, and so he moves to Milan, right? And again, his concubine comes with him, right? He's still got this chick, right? He's still rolling with her, right? Now, when he goes to Milan, his mom fucking shows up. She follows him, right? And she immediately sets about finding him a bride, a good Christian bride, right? And, she's probably convinced, like, oh, they're just friends, or, they haven't had sex or whatever. But he's been fucking her for 15 years. He's madly in love with her. And he winds up having to dismiss her, essentially.
Unless you say it that way.
Sorry. But they've been enjoying each other physically for a long time. They both love each other. They have a kid.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Now, when I say that, I'm not filling in the blanks. Augustine will die writing that this heartbreak was never healed from. He died loving this woman and missing the fact and regretting the fact that he sent her away. But
he sent her away?
Yeah.
Why?
Because he becomes a fucking Christian. right? And so he's gonna whatever, right? And the way he becomes a Christian is just, through all this fucking shit, he becomes friends with a bishop, of course, and he's smart, and he kind of like things that hook his interest. It seems like he's maybe a little obsessive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he moves from this religion, and when that wears out, he like moves to this one, and then when that wears out, he moves to this one. He might have had ADD, right? I don't know, but. So he does become a Christian, and his mom sets him up to marry an 11-year-old girl. Nice. So he's like, well, we got to wait a few years because, whatever. And eventually, though, he doesn't like waiting around for this girl to be old enough to fuck. Sorry. So he gets another concubine and winds up in the end breaking up with her and canceling on the fucking child bride, right? Which was the right move.
Yeah.
And and so from there, he becomes a Christian, and of course, all the people in the church that love Augustine want to be like, well, he finally found the truth. He went through all these other philosophies that just left him wanting. It just didn't have the real stuff because it didn't come from God. It was like a mere attempt, but it was flawed. And so then Christianity comes along and is like, oh, this answers all my questions. I can't, whatever. But there was a lot more going on. For instance, just a few years, maybe a couple years earlier, Emperor Theodosius I, who was the Roman emperor at the time, and this would have been in 380, okay? The year 380.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy that made the decree that the only legitimate religion in the empire, the whole empire, which was vast, was Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And along with it, he put out a little edict that said, oh yeah, by the way, kill all the Manichaean priests and leaders. And so he had some other influences that definitely made him go like, maybe I should fucking shift gears here, right? The government's threatening to kill you if you believe this. And so very human things are going on.
Light.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And so into Christianity, Augustine brought many Zoroastrian and Neoplatonic ideas through his prolific and able writings and defenses. One such concept he adapted into Christianity was around the nature of angels. With the extreme dualism of his previous philosophies, the role of angels and demons were prominent in his theology. The belief that demons are created angels who chose to rebel against God and fight for the evil one against God's plan. That's what people think of demons, right? They're angels who once were good, that rebelled against God.
Yeah.
Okay? That came from him.
From
Augustine.
Right. Okay.
And the reason he had that view is because his view was built by these Persian and Neoplatonic, like these ideas that had this dualistic thing, right? Good, bad, physical, spiritual, demons, angels. And so it comes into Christianity through Augustine, who becomes this very prominent and highly influential. He's a saint, and he defined so much of Christian doctrine. Doctrine that even was
so big in the church. Why was he so important in the church?
He's smart and prolific and cranked out shit. And it's the reason why anyone influences anything. Luck, privilege, who you know, not what you know kind of situations. But he also was brilliant, and he put out a lot of stuff, and it just laid the foundation for much of what the church would then develop as doctrine. So the belief that demons are created angels who chose to rebel against God and fight for the evil one against God's plan, and people come from him. Angels, on the other hand, were seen as choosing of their own will to stay loyal to God and served as messengers, mediators, and guardians of God's people. These ideas around angelology left an indelible mark on the faith, as they are core principles in both Catholic and Protestant faiths today, right? After Augustine, in the late 5th and early 6th century, a Christian philosopher and theologian named Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. That's a rad signature to have, by the way. I want "the" in my signature.
The Areopagite? Is that what you said?
Yeah, the Areopagite. I didn't even look at what that meant. I don't know if it's like where he's from or something. I don't know. He had big nipples, the Areopagite. I don't know.
Please edit that out.
Like areolas. I don't know.
No,
I'm just
you're going to edit that.
Pseudo-Dionysius. I'm not going to. Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite would continued to flesh out the Christian doctrines around angels. His writing classified angels into 9 different orders. Also, he called them choirs, going back to that whole singing thing, that were arranged in 3 spheres. The upper sphere was directly connected to God and consisted of the seraphim, cherubim, and thrones. The middle sphere governed the workings of the universe and natural world and consisted of dominions, virtues, and powers. And the lower sphere interacted directly with humans on behalf of God and consisted of principalities, archangels, and then regular old angels, right? If you've ever been to church and heard about how these words used in the Bible actually refer to different types of angels, it came from this dude who simply made it up. Okay. And so when for those of you who maybe aren't familiar, there's some verses in the Bible that says whether thrones or principalities or powers or dominions.
Right.
And this dude decided that's talking about different kinds of angels. And then he imagined and created his little art project of arranging them into these upper, middle, and lower spheres. And these ones are right with God. And these ones are kind of in the middle doing the whole universe. And these ones are like directly. He made it up.
Yeah.
And yet, you ask a Christian what these words mean. They're like, well, those are different kinds of angels because God said so. No, he did not.
Yeah.
Later in the Middle Ages, the prominent Christian theologian Thomas Aquinas added his own bullshit to angelology in the 13th century. He, like Augustine, maybe because of Augustine, was highly influenced by Aristotle and Neoplatonic philosophy, which taught that the world of the physical represents mere attempts at representing the pure form of a thing. Like we talked about. There's this perfect thing that's behind the scenes, behind the veil kind of thing, right? You could say, God, whatever, perfect. Everything's perfect out there. And then this world is like, ooh, it's a good attempt, but not good. There's something lacking. And so, again, you can see that, this physical world is somehow inferior to this spiritual realm. That's this perfect realm, right? Thomas presented Christian angels as being pure, undefiled, and perfect intellect, right? He's like, they're like entities that exist in that kind of Neoplatonic kind of that world of forms where everything's perfect. So if there's a perfect world over there, so there's a corrupt world over here and there's corrupt intellect. Like he would be like, I'm an intellect, but because of original sin and I'm in this corrupted world, I'm a corrupted intellect. Well, they got a perfect world over there. There must be perfect intellect. And he saw angels as being that, or at least one of the things that would be considered that, right? So because of that, he didn't actually believe angels had physical form, right? He believed angels were non-physical. They couldn't be physical because that would make them imperfect.
Oh, right.
Okay, that's part of the whole corruption here is that it has to take on physical form. And the physical can never really represent this amazing spiritual thing. Okay, and so angels were that amazing spiritual thing. Thus, they don't have bodies because that would immediately corrupt them.
Right.
So then when people are like, but in the Bible, there's like dudes that show up that are angels. He's like, well, they can assume bodies if they want to. I don't know if they're like possessing people or just tricking them.
And then there's the whole problem of like corrupted angels. If angels are perfect intellect, how can they be corrupted? Then they're not angels anymore, according to their definition of an angel.
Somebody else's problem. We'll find it.
Mental gymnastics it takes to believe that.
So he wrote in his highly influential work, Summa Theologiae. This is a huge book in Christian scholarship and theology. Quote, hence the perfection of the universe requires that there should be intellectual creatures. Now, to understand cannot be the action of a body, nor of any corporeal power. Hence, the perfection of the universe requires the existence of an incorporeal creature.
Incorporeal? What?
Non-bodied, right? No body. Corporeal would be having physical form. Incorporeal, not, right? Doesn't have.
Like corporal?
Well, like corpse.
Oh.
Or corpus, which means body, right?
It's sounding to me like corporal punishment, which means hitting people.
That is what corporal punishment means,
like
yes.
Physical punishment, hitting your body.
Bodily punishment.
Bodily punishment.
Same word.
Comes from the word corpus, corpse. Alrighty.
And so that's just saying what I just told you. I said it in English and he said it in fucking learned, I don't know, Latin shit, right? Which is, hey, there's a perfect world over there, which means they need to have this. And if they're perfect, they can't have bodies. And so they don't have bodies, you know?
That's the whole, like, demiurge, like being physical is
I mean, that's
evil.
definitely that lineage of that idea, right? Again, just tweaked and modified.
Right.
Oh no, we don't believe that. We believe just something just like it that just sounds like more like our shit, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So what's the point? The point is the angels are something that have been required by all manner of religions and invented philosophies for thousands of years. If we have a world of the gods and a world of the mundane, we need some way for them to interact, and thus angels. Christianity is no different, and in fact simply repurposed ideas from Judaism that itself been framed around Zoroastrianism. Add to that the Neoplatonic ideas of the early church leaders, and you wind up with the doctrine and beliefs around angels in the Christian church today, right? And so again, this is like going on in the fucking 1200s, or 12th century. Like it's like this long period of time this develops. So now that we understand what angels came from and how they've been developed, let's take a look at a few famous angels from Christianity and take a look at the connection one of them in particular has with Christmas. Whenever you ask someone to name an archangel, the first word out of their mouth is typically,
Michael.
Yep, Michael, she says confidently. Most people are like, hey, Archangel Michael, right? And
Gabriel is what I was.
Okay, we're going to talk about him
are
too.
The ones that are top of mind.
Do you know any other ones?
Those are the only.
Oh, look at you. You're good. But there are other ones. They just didn't come from the Bible. We'll talk about that. And they play a big role here. But so yeah, Michael's typically, he's referenced in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament and the book of Revelation in the New Testament. In both instances, he is depicted as a warrior leading the heavenly host on behalf of God, typically in defense of Jerusalem and Israel. He doesn't have dick to do with Christmas, though, and so we're going to move on. Okay? I don't know if he has a dick or not, but he doesn't have dick to do with Christmas. So the next of the most known angels is someone you didn't mention, but in many Christian circles, they would recognize this name.
Wait, give me a clue before you say it.
He's a Ninja Turtle. Every time I take the which Ninja Turtle are you, I get this person.
Raphael's the artist.
That is exactly his
Raphael
name.
is an angel. Raphael
is the name of a dude who was an artist, but his name, Raphael, the last name. Notice that last two letters. L, right?
Oh, okay.
God, right, is what L means. And so, I don't remember what Raphael means, but Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, right? They all have God on the end.
Look at that.
Okay, and so then people get named, it's like, name our kid Yoda, right? It's like this fucking person in some, mythos kind of thing. And so yeah, the next most well-known angel is Raphael. He's not in the Bible, by the way, and yet Protestants and Catholics know and venerate him to various degrees. So where did info on him come from? He actually plays a major role in an extra-biblical source known as the Book of Tobit, thought to have originated between 225 and 175 BCE, okay? Or BC, if you want. So this is part of the Apocrypha in the Catholic Church. They consider it part of the canon, the sacred scriptures. The Protestants rejected that as that. They don't hate it. They consider it maybe important and containing historical, but they don't believe it was written by the hand of God. None of it was, but anyway, this one to them really wasn't. And so the Book of Tobit is a part of the apocryphal books, right? And these are books that tend to span the time between they call it the intertestamental period between the Old and New Testament. But they, were written all the way into, kind of the first century. So the Book of Tobit, here's basically a summary and rundown of what happens. And this is just to talk about angels, right? He doesn't have to do with Christmas, really. But just to understand, like, how our religious ideas are fed from all kinds of places, right? It didn't spring from this wellspring of truth out of this one source.
Right.
And so in the Book of Tobit, it follows this guy named Tobit. Now, he was a Jewish man who was deported to the Assyrian capital of Nineveh as Assyria took over and conquered Israel. Again, in the Bible, that's portrayed because of their wickedness, and God sent them in to fucking fuck them up and shit and do all this because they were bad. And so now they're in all these different places, and it's not cool to do Jewish stuff. And one of the things that's very Jewish at this time is burying people. They didn't really do that, right? Other cultures. But the Jews did. And so, but at first he makes kind of friends with the king and, or the leader of, I think it was the king in Nineveh. Yeah, it was. And so he's cool with him and kind of even lets him get, like, go ahead and bury them. That's fine. It's cool. You know, he kind of works for the king. He's a smart guy. He's good with money. He travels on behalf of the king, right? But king dies. Well, I think the king, yeah, he dies and his son takes the throne and his son is not down, right? And so he catches Toby gets reported basically for burying a Jew, so he gets kicked out of town. But then he finally gets let back in, right? Because the sons of that king's son takes over. His sons kill him and then run to the hills, basically. And so Tobit comes back, and now he's kind of secretly doing it, right? He's no longer doing it out in the open. He's just kind of chilling. And so one day he's going to have dinner, sends his son out, says, hey, go find someone of our countrymen, in other words, a fellow Israelite, you know, and bring him here, and so we can have dinner. Go find basically a beggar out there who's one of our kin, you know, one of our countrymen. And the kid comes back and says, hey, I didn't find anyone, but I did see a dude. One of our countrymen was strangled, and they just threw his body in the market. And that's what the Assyrians would do. They just kind of chuck your body on the wall or whatever like that. And so Tobit's like, oh, bummer, cries, you know, weeps, does all this stuff. And then it goes, well, we got to go get him. Let's go get him and bury him. So they secretly, he goes and he buries him. No problem. But then he's got a problem in that he can't go in his goddamn house now because he's unclean. And the sun's already down. So he's got to fucking sleep outside, right? That's kind of Jewish law. That's how you got to do shit. Right. So he sleeps outside, and a bunch of birds shit in his eyes while he's asleep. This is in there. Sparrows, to be exact, by the way. He says, I didn't know there were sparrows up there, but apparently they shit all in my eyes while I'm asleep. And so I wake up fucking blind. I don't know if bird shit makes you blind. But he got blinded by bird shit. So, and he goes to a bunch of doctors, and they're trying, and it only gets worse. And he's like, "Oh, geez, you know." And so he's all bummed out. Well, luckily his wife finds lady work. Right? She's like sewing and doing the stuff that they're allowed to do. Right. And she works for people. And one day, not only did they give her wages, they kind of gave her a tip, a fucking goat. They give her a goat score. So she comes home with the goat, and Tobit's blind, and he hears the goat. And he immediately accuses her of fucking stealing it. Right? And he's like, you need to take that goat back because what will I look like if my wife, you know, and this blah, 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 blah. And she basically says, fuck you. I didn't steal the goat. Quit being such a holier than thou asshole, you know? And of course, then he like, oh, I might as well be dead. Like, so this is a common theme with the book of Jonah, by the way, in the Old Testament. You see that they basically are just... You'll see a lot of elements that they're just kind of making a play off Jonah. So Jonah also has these kinds of things, and his wife's the one like, just curse God and die, dude. And he's just like, oh, my wife, I'd be better off not married. You know, just like, oh, that shit. So you see that happening like, oh, when he's being the dickhole, she got this goat fair and square. And yet he accuses her and just be, you know, whatever. So anyway, he prays for death. Okay. Now, the narrative splits and we go to another location off in Media, which is in Persia. There was kind of these two empires, the Medo-Persian Empire is what they call it, and the Medes and the Persians. And so in Media, that's the land there. Again, I believe that Iran is still, Media would fall into those borders that we have today. And so, you know, the story picks up with this woman named Sarah. Okay. And Sarah is beating her father's servant, you know, because she's a rich fucking bitch. Okay. And the servant fucking gets pissed at her and starts yelling at her, you know, breaks away from her, and the maid starts yelling at her, and she reveals something very, very interesting about Sarah. Sarah's been married to 7 men. All 7 of them were murdered in the wedding chamber on the night of the wedding, before they fucked. Okay. Because that's what they would do. You get married. It was usually just a contract signing. It wasn't like our weddings where everyone got here. Hey, it was just like, oh, how many cows are you going to give me for my daughter? And what are you going to give me in return? Blah, blah, blah. And you sign here. And then they would take them to the wedding chamber. And then they would like fuck. That was the whole thing. Consummate the marriage. And so before that could happen, though, they all got murdered, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the word that the family is giving is that it's a demon, okay? And the demon even has a fucking name.
That the woman is a demon?
No, that a demon is killing the men. Because he's so in love with Sarah, she's so beautiful, he wants to fuck her, and he's not going to let anyone else fuck her. So every time she marries a dude, right before that can happen, bam, he murders them, right? And it turns out the dad has been secretly taking these bodies and going and burying them in secret so that no one finds out that all these dudes are winding up dead. Mm-hmm. Okay? And they're all like, it's the demon Asmodeus. Okay, so this is like one of the few times that we see a demon named in anything like this. But and so Asmodeus, in the current demonology, which is a real thing of the Catholic Church, Christians don't really get too much into this unless you're a really weird Christian Protestant, I should say, a Protestant. Unless you're really weird, like real fringe evangelical or something like that, you're probably not dealing with demon names. But in Catholicism, there's a whole thing of demonology, you know, and kind of shit like that. And so, Asmodeus today is associated with lust, probably because of this story. Oh, let me throw this in. So this is an actual quote from Tobit. This is that scene of the maid and her, right? It says, this is the book of Tobit, chapter 3, okay? Verse 8, if you care. For she had been given in marriage to 7 husbands, but the wicked demon Asmodeus kept killing them off before they could have intercourse with her and prescribed for wives. The maid said to her, "You're the one who kills your husbands. Look, you have already been given to marriage to 7 husbands, but you don't bear the name of a single one of them." If this was actually a thing that was happening, I think the maid was onto something, right? This sounds like a crazy girl. But anyway, it probably didn't happen. I'm just reading into it and whatever. But anyway, they're going on with this demon did it line. The story is that the demon wants to fuck Sarah so bad. Oh, blah, blah, we already did that. So we're given his name Asmodeus. Where did that come from? The scholarly consensus is that it's derived from the name Esma Deva, which translates to wrath demon. And where did he come from? You guessed it, Zoroastrianism. Okay, so again, even the demon. If this is being written in a time when Jewish thought was already fully soaked into this for hundreds of years, right? They've been in this world of Zoroastrian ideas. And so demons, which wasn't a big thing before all of that, right, in Jewish ideas, now he's named, you know, in this kind of thing. And it turns out that even though he's a wrath demon to them, it turns out to be a less demon now in Catholic Church because of this story, likely.
Yeah.
Right. And so then what happens? So this is all going on. You find out the anguish, and then Sarah starts praying for death. And so you can imagine this movie, right? The split screen with like Tobit on his knees going, "Fuck, I hate my wife. God, kill me." And Sarah going, "Bring me another husband to kill." I don't know, whatever she's praying. No, they're both wanting to die. They're both saying, "We just beg for death," right? And so what happens is at that moment, the angel Raphael shows up to both of them. Okay, he's named in here.
Okay.
But then it cuts over to Tobit's kind of narrative, right? And Raphael shows up, and he shows up disguised as a man named Azariah. Okay. So they don't know he's an angel. They just think he's a dude that shows up, who's an Israelite, and so they're kind of homies. And so Tobit's asking for death, but instead what ends up happening is he remembers, like, wait a minute, because he can't work now. He's dependent on his wife. His wife doesn't like him much now, so she's probably not going to be, and he's blind. What is he going to do? And so he remembers, oh, yeah, I fucking left money in Media, in a town in Media. Remember, he used to work for the king. Well, it turns out he used to, like, kind of stash money, like, kind of like put it in a bank almost there. Yeah. It wasn't a bank, but he would like deposit it with a friend or a countryman or whatever, a relative or something. And basically it's like, oh yeah, I got money there. And so he calls his son. His son's name is Tobias. And Tobias comes up and he's like, hey, I need you to go get this money, right? We need it. And his wife's like, no. He's like, but we need the money. And she's like, money is not worth more than your son's life. She's right, by the way.
Yeah.
And of course, Tobias is like, oh, you fucking, whatever. You're not godly or whatever. And so Tobias decides, yes, I'm going to go. And Azariah, Raphael, the angel Raphael, decides, I'm going to go along with you. Even his dog comes. It's a whole scene. Like, this is, you could see this being put into a show, right?
Okay.
And so, here's Raphael and Tobias, and they're going, right? And they stop for Tobias to bathe in the Tigris River. Now, this brings a huge problem of accuracy because the Tigris River is the opposite direction from Nineveh as media would have been. So there's no way. But the Tigris River is very symbolic. Because these people, we think they're all writing accurate, whatever, but it's wrapped in symbolism and things that have deep meaning.
Yeah.
And so he's bathing in the Tigris River when what would come attack him? A giant fish. Weird. That's original, right? And it grabs his foot and tries to swallow him. But Azariah, Raphael, the angel Raphael, says, no, grab him. And so Tobias manages to wrestle this fucking fish up on shore. They kill it. And Raphael proceeds to tell him, oh, hey, if you take the gall, like the fish guts or whatever, and rub it in a blind person's eyes and then blow on it, they'll be able to see again, right? He goes, oh, by the way, also, if you take the heart and liver and burn it, it will drive away demons. And I can just see Raphael going like, okay, that first one, that makes sense. Because blind dad, what the fuck is ahead of, he's like, are you trying to tell me something? Like, what do you mean demons, kind of thing. So anyway, they continue on. They get to the town where Sarah lives, actually, okay? And they're just kind of bopping around town. And all of a sudden, Raphael, after a couple days, they're hanging out. And Raphael says to Tobias, hey, there's this hot chick in town that isn't married. And her dad is related to your dad. So in their custom, the closer related you were,
you were supposed
the greater the claim you had to marry them. If there was two people wanting to marry someone, the one that was more closely related, you can imagine the problems this caused. But anyway.
Yeah.
And so he's like, dude, you're a shoo-in. No one else can come along because you fucking win. You're family. And so they're like second cousins, I think, or something. I think their dads are cousins.
Right.
Their dad's fathers are brothers, kind of situation. And so, but then Tobias goes, oh, yeah, I've heard of this girl. I've also heard that 7 dudes have been fucking pulled out of her bedchamber dead.
Yeah.
I think I'm good. I don't need that. And he's like, no. Remember the fucking fish guts. Like, you're fine. It's a demon.
Was a demon.
It's a demon.
You'll be safe.
And you got the heart. He's still carrying a fish heart and liver with him. This guy must have stunk to high heaven, right? And the gall, whatever that is. It's goo. And so he's like, you're good. And so they wind up going to the house of Sarah's father. His name is Raguel. There's an angel later in Christian mythology that's actually takes his name, Raguel or something weird like that. And his wife's name is Edna, which is probably from Eden.
Okay.
Again, there's a lot of symbolism in here and stuff like that. She's shown as very innocent. She's shown as very complimentary to her husband, while Tobit's wife fights him, and she kind of represents the fallen woman, Edna or Eden. It represents kind of like the innocent Eve that's just there to serve her husband and joyful about it, and everything's fine. They don't fight, and so they're kicking it. He's super pumped to meet his whatever he is to him, grandnephew. I don't know what he would be, nephew. Well, I don't know. And he's like, "Come in, they're pumped. Remember, they're living in a foreign land. It's like if you were living in some far off place, and all of a sudden an American showed up, people like, come on, let's have hot dogs, whatever, right? So he's like, come in, and they're kicking it, and so it's like him, his wife, and Raphael, Azariah, that's who they see him as, this dude, and Tobias, and they're just chilling, have this great meal and everything. They're having a good old time, and then Tobias leans over and says, "Hey, Azariah, ask him if I can marry his daughter." Because that's what they're talking about. But he's like, "You present it, Well, he hears it, and he's like, "Oh my God, that'd be fucking awesome!" And you're so closely related to us. It's amazing, right? And then he's like, I got to be 100% with you, though. I'd love to sell you my daughter right now, but you got to know something. I've done this 7 times, and I fucking buried them all, And And he's like, oh, no, I'm good. I'm not worried. And he's like, okay, if you're down, I'm down, right? And so they signed the contract, and Edna, his wife, takes his daughter to their daughter to the thing to fuck this guy,
Yeah.
And the dad, Ragael, gathers some servants, and they go dig a grave. Because they're like, this dude's dead,
this poor dude,
right? Because they're probably going like, our daughter's killing these people, like, I don't know. She's their only child, and just, this whole thing. And so anyway, after a little bit, so he goes, digs a grave. He comes back. It's been a while. It's been long enough that's,
he should be dead.
Yeah. And so he bravely sends his wife into the room to go see if there's a corpse. I love that detail. He's like, he sent his wife to check on them. And he goes in there, and they're just like, must be in bed, just like post-coital bliss. Everything's fine. And she's like, you're not dead. He's like, oh, yeah, I had the fish heart and liver, and he threw it on the incense coals, when he came in, and it, Asmodeus was driven to Egypt, and Raphael, of course, flew in an instant there and bound him and back, this whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so he's married now to Sarah, living the life. He stays there for some time. Now, remember, his dad is blind, and he has the cure for blindness. Anyway, that's so weird to me. But he, kicks it long enough to become rich in this town, and then decides, you know what? Why was I doing this?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, my dad needed money. He's got this beautiful young wife and this fucking awesome, and he's like, we should probably get back now, actually, And so he goes back, and when he gets there, smears the shit in his eyes and blows on it. Oh, I could see, and the whole deal, right? And then, the story goes, and then Raphael departs, but before he departs, he's like, be good Jews in Assyria, kind of, that's the whole message, is basically like, don't be, bad. Still eat the right food and do all the shit, whatever. And so that's a source, that story, which again is not, if you go to a evangelical church, they're not going to know shit about the Book of Tobit.
No.
Even your pastor, unless he went to seminary or something where you would read it. I went to a Christian liberal arts college, and we had to read the whole Apocrypha in our New Testament class, but so I read the Book of Tobit when I was 18 years old and don't remember a thing
Right.
from it. But yeah, this is the source material of a lot of Christian belief are books like this, as we'll see, okay? Because now we're going to get to Christmas. We're going to get to the angel and the beliefs and some of the vibe around the nativity scene, and then we'll talk about nativity scenes and where they came from and how we got to where we are now real quickly, okay? But now let's talk about an angel that is actually tightly tied to Christmas. He's actually the first angel that is mentioned by name in the Bible. His name is Gabriel, and he shows up in Daniel where he interprets the weird dreams Daniel's been having. He also appears in the Gospel of Luke where he announces both the births of John the Baptist and Jesus, right? Gabriel. His name is actually in the Bible, like Michael. They're the only two. And he's the first one, as you read through the Bible, he's the first one mentioned, and he's, anyway, we won't go through Daniel, but a dude has a dream and it's all weird and he asks for help and he shows up. Yeah. Gabriel does, right? Yeah. But more importantly to Christmas is that he shows up in the book of Luke announcing both John the Baptist, which we'll talk about what's going on here, but John the Baptist's birth as well as the birth of Jesus, right? So he's very tightly tied, as they call that, the Annunciation, right? There's the festival, the Annunciation, all that kind of shit. And so Gabriel is super, super, super tied to Jesus. In fact, when you talk about the Christmas angel, the angel on your tree, it's Gabriel that's being represented there. Even if you didn't know that, that's what it was originally modeled after, right? However, our Christmas traditions and ideas don't actually come from the Bible, at least what we call the Bible, okay? What if you went and bought a Bible, it's not in there, kind of thing. Yeah. In fact, the Gospels spend very little time and have very little detail around the birth of Jesus. It's only briefly covered in Matthew and Luke, and their accounts differ on a lot of points, right? Where we actually get a lot of our Christmas traditions regarding the birth narrative is the apocryphal Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. That's what it's called officially. It's also referred to as the infancy gospel of Matthew. Maybe some people have heard of that. Virtually any story you've ever heard, any tradition about what Jesus did as a boy or miracles that accompanied him and all this shit when he was a kid come from this.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The Bible doesn't talk about that. He fucks off to Egypt because Herod's trying to kill all the baby boys.
Right.
So they go to Egypt, warned by an angel, by the way. And then it picks up when he's 12 years old and he returns. Right. In between, doesn't say shit, but this one fills in the blanks for us, you know. And they have all these stories of him like doing little mean kid things almost with his magic, you know, like Jesus was a little bratty fucking magic kid, and that kid made fun of him, and so he fucking did something terrible to him with his god powers. Seriously, it's like that. And so however, Pseudo Matthew, that's what we'll call it, and other such writings were highly influential in the Middle Ages, which is the basis of a lot of the Christian doctrine and belief that we have today. It was likely composed sometime in the mid-600s, with the oldest surviving manuscript fragments dating to about 800. Right? We're talking CE, right? Not BC. This is new. This is medieval stuff.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It covers the story of Mary's parents, Joachim and Anna. And it starts like a ton of shit like this does. Joachim was super good, super rich, super generous, and yet his wife could not become pregnant now in her later years, right? That happens
Sounds
all over the
familiar.
goddamn Bible,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
This man was a righteous man. However, his wife could not conceive child. And yet they were very old and they had given up hope, okay? That's an important thing that we're going to find out is culturally influenced right here. This is a common motif in ancient religious cultures. An elderly woman who had been praying for a baby but never got pregnant, leading her to give up all hope, only then to become pregnant. It was thought that these scenarios yielded offspring that had significant and important futures in the world. It was like an omen, right? They're like, holy shit, she's barren.
Yeah.
She'd given up hope.
Yeah.
And now she's pregnant. Oh, this must be a great kid.
Yeah.
If it's a boy, this must be a great kid. That's really what it was. Man, that kid has a great future. Born a girl. Whoops. So we see this in the New Testament with Zechariah and Elizabeth, John the Baptist's parents. She was old. He was old. They fucking were well past that, right?
Yeah.
And we also see that with Abraham and Sarah giving birth to Isaac. And also there's a book in the Bible called Samuel in the Old Testament, and tells the story of Hannah, who was the mom of Samuel.
That's right.
And she was an old woman who also conceived. And we'll see some other. In fact, Anna being Mary's mom's name is probably taken from Hannah from the Old Testament because something similar happens in the whole deal there. And so Joachim, that's how you say that, right? Joachim is so bummed about this, he goes to the temple, but his sacrifice is rejected, leading him to figure he is being, I don't know what that means, by the way.
Sacrifice being rejected.
Did the priest go like, no, get that the fuck off the altar? I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Or if like the smoke went the wrong way. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, because wasn't Abel's
like what
sacrifice
again,
was rejected?
these are details that obviously weren't
we need to
we have to make up now because and so his sacrifice isn't accepted, which leads him to believe that God's pissed at me, right? And he runs out into the wilderness to basically repent and do penance. How long do you think he's been out there, by the way?
40-something.
40 days. Interesting, right? It's so weird. These guys like pick 40-day camping trips.
Wasn't
like
sure if it was going to be 40 years or 40 days.
Yes, 40 years. Jesus. He didn't have that much time. Okay. But 40 days, right? Of course, in the whole desert scene. Anyways, while he's out on his repentance camping trip, angels appear to both him and Anna, telling him that they will have a child. Joachim returns to Jerusalem to find Anna at the gate, at which point they hug and celebrate the good news that they will have a child. This image of them like hugging is super prevalent throughout Christian art, through the Middle Ages and stuff like that. This scene, it kind of comes to represent something because remember, these are Mary's parents. Think about how important Mary is in the whole Catholic fucking scene, right? And so this is a big deal to them, this whole story. And we'll see that a lot of the stuff that people believe about Mary, even in fucking Protestant faiths, come from here, not anything else, not the Bible, right? So this image becomes a popular one in medieval Christian art and when it's depicting the life and holiness of Mary. Even in Islam, Joachim is called Imran, and is the father of Miriam and the grandfather of Jesus, who they actually venerate as a pretty important prophet, though inferior to Muhammad, right? So they're like, he's like second good, best. And so they even have this story in their shit, and they just give different names, Arabic names to them.
Yeah.
This story and the art that proliferated it also establishes the idea that Mary was the product of an immaculate conception herself, right? That was a big kind of belief in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
It's dogma in the Catholic Church. We'll see how it got there. But the idea that not only was Jesus conceived without sin, but you can see like they're like, oh, how the fuck did I do that? How does Mary... Well, she must have been conceived without sin. That's how you conceive a perfect person. Yeah. Right? And see, it causes problems. We're going to see that they have to sort out, but they sort it out fine. We'll find out. It's easy. And so some earlier manuscripts of this book include the detail that Joachim and Anna fucked. Like they talk about, they laid with each other, just like she was born just like anyone else. But they really liked the idea of the immaculate thing, and so they kind of went with the versions that didn't have that detail, right? So people like this idea, gained popularity. It got so intense that it almost led to a literal civil war between the Franciscan and Dominican orders of monks, right? They were so divided. And one team's like, they fucked, and the other team, they didn't fuck. And they got to the point where they were going to battle it out almost, right? And so it raged on for a long time. In fact, in 1849, Pope Pius IX essentially issued what we would call like a fucking Instagram poll or whatever to all the bishops. Thumbs up or thumb down on Mary being conceived with sex or not, right? 90% of the respondents were like, thumbs up, dude, let's do it. You know, a couple of them were like, oh, probably like, why are we talking about this? You know, what does this have to do with me? But because of that, they kind of accepted it as like, I guess you'd call it doctrine or like general belief of the faith. But in this time, so he says, cool, we're going to go with this. We're going to teach this. But then that started all these debates, right? And the first one was like, oh, what about original sin? Like Mary was born like, you know, a fallen woman. Yeah. Original sin. We're all sinners. Like she's filthy. So how can she give birth to God, right? If she's in the state. Again, you can kind of see this physical, spiritual kind of, you know, duality happening, shit like that. And so there's all kinds of things. Some people were like, oh, well, I bet she's like a new Eve, right? And like the Eve, she, you know, fell and was thrown out of the garden. Everyone inherited sin. But Mary, she's a new Eve, like innocent like that before the fall, right? She's like Eve before the fall. Eve redux, right? We're going to do this over. That was their view, right? Yeah. Some of them just said like, you know, it's God. They fucked, but he just went like, ooh, that's clean, and everything was fine, right? Like he just kind of turned to like, okay, well, we won't call this dirty, right? And then my favorite were the ones that are just like, let's just kick this motherfucking can up the road, right? We're talking about Mary being immaculately conceived because Jesus was immaculately conceived. And how can you have a perfect baby born without having a perfect mom? Right. Well, how can you have a perfect mom born without having a perfect dad? And so her dad was immaculately conceived by her mom. And then they're like, but how did that happen? They're like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about Mary. And I just gave you the reason why Mary was immaculately conceived, why this isn't an issue. Someone else will deal with the fucking dad and the whole thing. So they're just, you know, they're just pulling shit out of their ass, trying to justify this thing that people like, and, you know, it, whatever. Yeah. And so, despite all this discussion and that continued to go, I'm sure there's still people in the Catholic Church that are just like, oh, I don't know, you know. In 1954, the Catholic Church elevated Mary's Immaculate Conception to dogma. So it is absolutely from God to Catholics, right? That Mary was conceived without sex, because that would be corrupting, and so then she couldn't give, you know, all this stuff. Just crazy shit. Okay. However she was born, Mary is given over to the temple for service as a temple virgin. Samuel was given to the temple by Hannah. Mary was given to the temple for service by Anna. Okay, so these are just frameworks that we're just like repurposing, right? The pseudo Matthew also recounts that Mary was a perpetual virgin, something else the church would adopt as dogma in spite of the Bible talking about Jesus's brothers. Right? So that's another thing. It's like, oh, not only did she not fuck to have Jesus, she never fucked.
Yeah,
right? She was a
right.
virgin forever.
Yeah.
And, the New Testament talks about brothers in language that means literal brothers. And so, whatever. Anyway, once Mary ages out of, once you're a certain age, they're like, oh, probably when you got your period, I'm assuming. That's when you became unclean once a month. You couldn't be in the temple doing all that shit. So I'm assuming once they sexually matured, then they can no longer be a temple virgin. And so now she needs a guardian. You can't be a woman out on your own. Mm-hmm. And you couldn't in this culture, actually. And so her parents, Joachim and Anna, choose Joseph, right? And so he gets picked to be her husband. Mary's promised to Joseph based off of the fact that she can't be a temple virgin anymore. She's too old now. And so now she's going to be married and promised to Joseph, right? And so, if you've ever heard the belief, I literally have heard this in multiple churches I've been in, where they communicate that Joseph didn't believe Mary at first.
Yeah.
But then came to believe her and married her, despite the fact that he was at first said, no, you're lying.
Yeah, but an angel came and told him.
So that's not in the Bible.
Oh, okay.
Yes, an angel shows up to Joseph and says, hey, she's pregnant with the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. But the idea that he had this very human reaction of oh, right, God did it. You fucking, I'm out of here. I'm not marrying you. Mm-hmm. That comes from this, okay? It doesn't come from the Bible. And you can see why we would do that. Because you're like, how would I feel? I would not believe that bitch. Whatever. Yeah. I would not believe her. I would first do this, and then have to be convinced, and then I'd be like, okay, and then I'd be super stoked on it. And that's what they made Jesus do. Joseph do in this story, right? And so from Pseudo Matthew, you get all kinds of spin-offs and fan fiction that provided more details that the church holds to today, even Protestants in some cases, right? And so the nativity, right, when you talk about Mary and stuff, in here is the first time you see an ox and donkey show up at the nativity. That's not in the Bible either. And yet all of your nativity scenes always include an ox and donkey. Yeah. We'll find out that the oldest fucking ones we've ever made have an ox and donkey along with the Holy Family. Yeah. And that's it. And it comes from this, okay? The reason we imagine there's no animals mentioned in the Bible, and they weren't in a... We think of the stable and the whatever. He was in a stone carving inside of a cave in Bethlehem. This is the Middle East. There wasn't this little A-frame wooden building, with hay and a little wooden thing. Yeah. If anything, if it wasn't, but if anything, it would have been probably a carved out niche that existed in some cave where animals would shelter, and that's where they would throw feed and things like that. Mm-hmm. But an ox and donkey show up. It's probably just important shit going on in medieval Europe, and so they throw that in, it brings that lowly countryside everyman kind of feel, right? So let's talk about nativity scenes, right? A very common and popular Christmas tradition, at least in areas dominated by Christianity. So first let's talk, though, we talked about how angels have a look in our mind. Mm-hmm. We picture an angel a certain way. Where does that come from? Because in the Bible, when you think about the seraphim and the cherubim, they are not described at that at all. They are described as fucking bizarre creatures covered in hundreds of eyes and wings, and they're not human in any way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. They are very much over the top, crazy, almost psychedelic kind of creatures. Yeah. So in reality, when you imagine an angel or hang a picture of one on your home or buy a statuette to put in your office, you're actually venerating a very old and very important goddess in Greek mythology. And bonus, every single fucking person listening to this knows her name already. Even if you didn't know, you were wearing and saying her name. You see, the image we have in today's popular Christian depictions are not taken from the pages of Scripture. Who we are actually depicting is the goddess Nike. She is the goddess of victory. Now, there's debate on her origins. She's very tightly tied to Athena. Athena was called Athena Nike. Some people believe that Nike, which is victory, that's what that word means, which is why Nike fucking picked the word.
Yeah.
Was an aspect of Athena that then was just broken off as a distinct personality as people developed Greek mythology and things like that. Other people believe that, no, Nike was a distinct being the whole time and that Athena Nike just refers to whatever. There is some differences. Athena was military victory. That was her whole thing. Nike is victory. It represented victory in every form. Sports, military, your job, life, your crafts, your hobbies, your love life, wherever you're winning, she was fucking the one that you thanked. She was the one that you venerated and asked for, blessings from and shit like that. What did she look like? Sexy lady in a white robe, two big old bird wings that look identical to, if you drew angel wings, they're Nike wings. That is what happened. She is ubiquitous throughout the classical world. She was venerated all over the place because of the reach of the Greco-Roman world, right? And that's just simply what they chose. When they're repurposing these pagan, heathen things and turning them into Christian things, they chose this winged woman, right? And it's really interesting. She actually marks a really big development in carving in like the statue and the artwork of the statue is that she's the first one that shows up with what they call the wet style. And so before that, when you look at the Greek statuary and stuff like that and these sculptures, a lot of focus is on the clothes, right? On the robes. And it's kind of boxy almost and like not super they're naked, they look super realistic, but with clothes on, it's not as much, right? And so they put a lot of detail into like, and they were all painted and stuff, and so it was all whatever. Hers, they began to focus on, even when you had clothes on, the body underneath the clothes. And so it's clinging and flowing and kind of organic, and you could see hints of like even sinew showing through a robe. It was like erotic and sensual without having to be like pornographic. And her iconography and the sculptures, the sculptors that were creating her initially, they seem to have invented this style of making this super, which is exactly how you see angels today, right? Pseudo sexy, it's a little sexy, but still innocent, that they kind of created this style. And so I'm just saying that's interesting that her statue. But anyway, Nike is fucking who an angel is today. That's the picture that we took, right? And then just assigned it to, fucking whatever. So let's talk about nativity scenes, right? While there are a few early depictions of the nativity of Jesus, like there's some frescoes and some early catacombs, which were places that you would bury people. And so the Christian catacombs, there's a lot of art down there. That's where like symbols like the fish and anchor and the fucking all these things we associate with Christianity today kind of started down there as these kind of secret ways to communicate your faith in a time when being a Christian wasn't cool with Rome. And so there is some depictions of like a nativity scene in a way, but really the first time we see this used as like a seasonal thing that is associated with a holiday like Christmas. Well, it would be Christmas because the nativity was in 1223, and it's actually Francis of Assisi. You've heard of that, right? Those are the Franciscan monks, right? Francis of Assisi, he's a huge fucking saint in the church and all this kind of shit. Anyway, in 1223, he just gets back from a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, all hopped up on Jesus, right? That's what happens. So in 1223, he gets back from the Holy Land. He's all pumped. I got to do something, right? And his goal, what strikes him, and this is crazy, but this is literally essentially what he says is, I need to help put the Christ back in Christmas and not have it be about gift giving and materialism. No shit. In 1223. It's 2023. 800 years ago, this motherfucker is saying the same bullshit his fucking goddamn ancestor Christians are saying. Anyway. So that's what he wants to do. And he does something cool. I have to give it to him. St. Francis was like the poor monk, right? He was the one that served the poor. He was rich dude and made himself low.
Yeah.
And he actually walked the fucking walk that he was talking, right? And this is a time when the content of your faith and any understanding around it came from the clergy.
Mm-hmm.
They spoke Latin. There was not a single Bible or anything written out not in Latin. That was 300 years away. Yeah. Having a Bible in a language you could read, right? And most of them couldn't even read anyway. And so your whole faith is given to you by this dude speaking language, and you're just like, oh, okay, I did my thing, like you don't know what the fuck's going on. Yeah. So he decides, rather than that, he gets people together, and he puts on the first nativity. The first nativity scene was a living nativity. Action, yeah. And if you've been in church, you've probably been to one, or you went to the streets of Bethlehem.
They have that up on the South Hill.
Fuck yeah, they do. They do it in every town.
Right now. I've been,
Hey, let me tell you something. When Marnie and I were fucking 21 years old. We had a little baby. His name is Taylor. Taylor has a little baby now. Oh, we didn't tell you that. We're grandparents now, by the way. Woo! And so our son Taylor was baby Jay, right? And I was Joseph.
I drove past that, and I was like, oh my gosh, totally remembering. I was going to bring it up to Taylor.
We have a picture of us. You just see us. We look like goddamn teenagers.
I know.
And I literally led a donkey with Marnie riding on it. And we all had these Middle Eastern garb and headscarves. This is a true story when we were 21.
Yeah. And they kept Taylor in a motorhome in the back. In the heated motorhome, waiting for us to wander through the streets on the donkey and land at the stable. And then they would pass him through the backside and put him in the manger, and we would sit there while people...
I was given this line of when I was asked, what are you doing? And I was supposed to say, oh, I'm here to find, shelter and water and a place to stay for my wife and my donkey. And they had these Roman guards, and these motherfuckers were great, by the way. They were supposed to kind of be the comedy relief and lighten things up. And so they approach me and they go like, what are you doing here in town? Or why are you here? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm here to find shelter and water, for my wife and my donkey. And the guy goes, which one's your wife and which one's the donkey? Ah, it's so hard for me not to laugh. I'm supposed to be offended apparently, but it was funny. Anyway. Back to Francis. So he sets up a living nativity, and by doing this, he's bringing this story from the Bible of their faith in a very relatable way to common people. People show up, and for the first time, it's like, this makes sense to me. First of all, their peers are up there playing these parts. Yeah. They're not the separation of this clergy who's the magisterium.
That's why they do it today. That's why we did it.
Well,
it was bring it to life.
His fucking idea is what I'm saying.
Get people in it.
Francis came up with this shit, which, whatever, good for him, right? Super effective move. At the time, like I said, no English Bible, no Bible of any type other than Latin. Only the fucking church people spoke. Church priests, the fucking leaders, the educated spoke Latin. And so, it proved super popular. Many visitors took the idea back to where they were from. People came from far and wide to see this shit. And it kind of gains in popularity, right? And other churches start going we need to do this. Now, the original ones that started to crop up, they didn't replicate the living nativity. I'm sure some places did. Yeah. But in general, what you started to see were these churches started having these statues made, right? And they would typically put them in some side chapel or grotto on the side of the church that was exposed to the outside. And so anyone could walk by and see this thing. And they were permanent usually. Yeah. They were something that were set up to venerate this, and at Christmas they would all go there and whatever, do their whole thing kind of thing, right? And so probably the oldest example of this happening is in actually the Sistine Chapel in a church called the Basilica of Saint Mary Major. I don't know what the fucking that means. I guess the Great. I don't know. But before that, it was known as Saint Mary of the Crib. Right? Which made sense. Let's put the fucking nativity scene in the crib church, right? And so they did. And it consists of Mary, Joseph, baby Jesus, and then a pedestal that has the head of a donkey and the head of the ox.
Weird.
Where do they get that from? Fucking pseudo Matthew, right? Did it come from the
Yeah, but it's
Bible?
weird that there was a pedestal with the head of
Yeah, I
him.
don't know if the guy was like, I don't want to make a whole goddamn donkey and ox. That's
Weird.
huge, right? And so it's a pedestal and it has these two heads coming off it. One's it just representing that, hey, they were there. And it's very stylized. They don't have the same kind of pastoral quality that St. Francis was going after because he was a pastoral
Yeah,
dude.
yeah.
Would probably fucking sleep out in the goddamn cow shit with the cows or whatever, he was that kind of dude. And so they kind of tended to be ornate in some cases or whatever, but still this idea of a seasonal kind of setup
Yeah.
that has these figures around the story, kind of became super, super popular, right? And it kind of continued through like the 14th and 15th century, and then the Reformation hits Europe, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are fleeing the Catholic Church and heading over to Lutheranism and these other offshoots of Reformed kind of theology. And when the Council of Trent is held in 1563, it's kind of like dire. There's the church is like, holy shit, we're bleeding people, which means we're bleeding money, and all this kind of shit. And around that time, the Jesuit order had just been founded,
Yeah.
right? We live in a town, Gonzaga University. You probably heard of the basketball team, I guess. It's a Jesuit university. It's run by you go there's a bunch of goddamn priests and nuns walking around, and they're the Jesuits, and they had just been formed, and they were formed as kind of a
They were
force.
the Counter-Reformation.
The Counter-Reformation folks, right?
Trying to drag people back by
Exactly.
force
I even put
back
that in here.
into the Catholic Church. I remember that from the
Yes.
Catholic history.
So not
from
all of them were yes, that
Church
was
history.
an element. There was some of that in some places at some times, but in general, they were looking to woo people back into the church through whatever, right? So while they're there at the Council of Trent, one of the topics they're discussing is the proper way to display and do certain iconography. You got all these goddamn things. You got to have rules. You can't just show Mary any way you want. You can't just show this dude any way you want. There's rules how you do this. This guy's got to be on this side. This guy's got to be whatever, right? They got to do all this. It's very formal. You got to come up with. And so while the Jesuits are there, they kind of have this idea like, okay, the Lutheranism popped up in Germany, right?
Yeah.
And so Christmas trees got real hot with the fucking Protestants because that was a German thing.
Yeah.
And so the Jesuits are like, the fucking pagan Christmas tree, that's what the Protestants have. We're going to have our fucking answer to that. And so they decide nativity sets, nativity scenes, right? This is going to be our Christmas tradition rather than, the evil trees kind of thing. And so they saw an opportunity to present an alternative to that, as well as they thought, ooh, we can convert savages in the New World because we have these little dolls now that we can, kind of like, ooh, look, here's Jesus, kind of thing. So they began to use the, really ornate. And by the 1600s, you see like the moneyed and upper class begin bringing them into their homes. And so things start getting smaller.
Yeah.
And because they're rich people, they got to outrich each other. And so they start getting really fancy or really different. And they start kind of expanding some things. They start taking on ethnic and local kind of flavors, And so you have a nativity scene, but it kind of looks like your people, kind of like, and they're wearing clothes that you guys would wear, instead of those guys or whatever. And then as the Industrial Revolution roared ahead through the 18th and 19th centuries, we saw the beginning of mass producing of these sets, right? And so now they're made from clay and plaster and paper mache and other inexpensive materials. And instead of artists, we have artisans now just making molds and cranking out these things. And it was also during this time that you see the addition of things like shepherds and sheep and wise men and camels. And of course, the fucking angel, right?
Yeah.
That all came along in the 1800s. Okay, this is not like, oh, it developed, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so what we have today, and now you can buy the Simpsons nativity scene. You can buy literally in zombies. You can buy it's everywhere, and the reason we have all those is because of this legacy.
Yeah.
It started here, and then people went like, that's fun, let's do that. And hey, I would like it better if it was
What's
like
funny
this.
is that there was the Protestants had the Christmas trees and the Catholics had the nativity, and now both have both.
Yep. Because everyone went like, why can't we
like
have
yours.
a cool ass tree in our house?
Oh, you have that. I like that. Can I have that?
Yeah, it's exactly what happens, right? And so just to wrap things up, let's talk about one more thing real quick, just a minute of how the fuck angels became the tree topper. right?
Oh, yeah.
Now you're like, well, it's because he was the announcer and angels up top. And yes, all that makes sense.
Yeah.
But that's not how things happen.
Right.
They don't happen because they make sense. They happen because of a series of events.
Yeah.
Right. And there's tons of things that maybe should have happened that never happened because those series of events didn't happen for it, kind of thing. And so going back to at least like the early 1600s, the traditional topper that the Protestants were using was a baby Jesus. They always fucking start there, right?
Okay.
Remember in the Santa Claus episode, we talk about the development of Santa, and where do they start with? Well, baby Jesus comes, once a year or whatever. And so over time in certain areas, an angel starts replacing Jesus. Probably just because they're like, oh, we should put an angel up there. I don't know. Someone starts putting and it starts kind of catching on and stuff like that. But it kind of depended on where you were and what you had as your traditional thing, right? It wasn't this ubiquitous thing by any means.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but that all changed in 1848 when Queen Victoria released a Christmas card. And so it was her and her husband, Prince Albert.
Mm-hmm.
We now call a penis piercing that, but I don't know why his name. I don't know if he had one. That's true. Prince Albert. Anyway, him and his wife, Queen Victoria, release a Christmas card, and it's an engraving. That's how they do it. They engraving and print it or whatever. It's an engraving of them decorating a Christmas tree. Now, Christmas trees weren't like super popular in Britain. It was not a common thing. It wasn't something that most people had ever had or maybe even heard of. Or it was something like foreigners did over in another land.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, the queen and her husband are standing, the trees in the middle, and they're hanging ornaments. There's tinsel on it. There's fucking lights on it. Not electric lights, but there's lights on it, right? It looks like our Christmas trees. It looks identical, right? And on top of it is an angel.
Oh, yeah.
And because of that, we have trees in America because of this. Not because of Christianity. We had Christianity long before this, right? Before trees. Christmas trees came in because Queen Victoria. Right? It became a popular, hip, cool thing. The celebrity's doing it, right? Our queen's doing it. It must be cool, and I want to be associated with what's cool.
Yeah.
And so trees began to proliferate, and because she had an angel on top of her tree, that became the de facto, that's the proper thing to put on your tree.
An angel or a star?
An angel. Yeah, the star came later as we brought that in.
We always put a star.
I know we had cool stars too, and they always lit up and it was all ornate, like fucking super gnarly. But we did have angels for a while too. Do you remember the little like hideous little angels that were like dolls, like Cupid dolls almost or whatever? And over the years they just deteriorate into like crazy. But anyway, that's the story of angels. What they have to do with Christmas, how we got them, how this is a concept that just our religions have to have. If we're going to have religions that have this world and our world, and how do we bridge that gap, and God's up there and us down here all lowly, how do we get there? Well, we need things in between, bringing messages and carrying our prayers or whatever.
Yeah.
And so angels have just always been required in our religions.
Yeah.
And Christian angels are just one version of that borrowed from all kinds of shit. Cool?
Yeah.
All right. Merry Christmas, everyone. We'll see you in 3 years.
No.
I'm just kidding.